Without wasting any time, here's the video. What if Naruto inherited Madara's full power? Let's jump right into it and see how things could have turned out. Deep within a dark cave in an unknown land, an old man could be heard coughing harshly. The old man was sitting in a chair with several wires connected to his back. He had fragile, wrinkled skin, long, dull white hair that hung loosely over his face with bangs covering his left eye. His only visible eye was a dark red color with 3 black volumes in them. The old man slowly raised his right hand, as if he was signaling to someone for a few seconds. Then the ground in front of him slowly rose, and a plant-like figure submerged. "You called Madara?" Sama, the plant-shaped man, asked in a deep, dark voice. "Setsu. When is he going to attack?" he asked. At the time called Madara, without clarifying who was that him. "The day the Jinchuriki gives birth. In 2 weeks the seal will be at its weakest." Setsu replied. Madara nodded and waved goodbye to the black. "Setsu, there are 2 weeks left until my successor is conceived," he thought with a bit of emotion. Suddenly, he hunched forward in a coughing fit. He brought his hand up and grimaced at the sight of blood on his hand. He sat down on his chair that looked like a throne. He looked at his frail body with his Sharingan and frowned. There is not much time left, he thought bitterly. Some might say that he already had a successor in death. However, that was not the case. Although he could have trained Obito and manipulated him to continue with his plan, so to speak, Obito was nothing more than a stepping stone for him to advance in his goal. Someone to who would he put aside when his grand plan was in play. He wanted someone of his own blood, someone who would one day surpass him in his prime, someone who would carry on his blood. Who knows, maybe he'll even offer me a nice dance when the time comes. So when he found out that Kusina Uzumaki was pregnant with triplets, he couldn't help but feel dizzy at the thought of one of them being his successor, being the son of a Jinchuriki, and Uzumaki, no less. The son of the famous fourth Kai, Kusina Uzumaki. The child was destined to be filled with so much potential. He would inject the child with his Agni, that of Hashirama, and if the child survived, he would become a force without equal, a god among men, a true successor to Madara. Yukiya, a small laugh, escaped his old dry lips that soon turned into a dark, loud laugh that echoed throughout the small dark cave. XXX 2 weeks later, the screams of pain of a woman giving birth could be heard. "Damn you, Namek Seminato. I'm going to take that away from you. That makes you a man," the red-headed woman shouted again. "Come on, K-chan. Just a little more," answered a very nervous and very worried blonde man who was next to her, holding her hand. "Don't cuss me, Chan Tua." His painful voice was interrupted when he felt that all the pain he was feeling was greatly relieved. The crying sounds of 3 babies brought the panting and exhausted Kusina back to reality. She opened her blurry eyes and saw 2 nurses holding 3 blankets in their arms. "Congratulations, you gave birth to 3. What the nurse was going to say was cut short when a kunai stabbed into her head, killing her instantly. A ripple like a whirlpool suddenly appeared in the air, and before they could even wonder what it was, a man wearing a black cloak with an orange mask with a single hole for an eye suddenly appeared out of the ripple and had somehow caught one of the children and was pointing a kunai at the little infant. "Get away from the Jinchuriki. This baby will die at the tender age of 3 minutes, the man demanded as he brought the kunai closer to the boy. "Now, let's all get down," Minato said nervously, his mind racing through the many possible ways to save his son and his family. "I am perfectly calm. Perhaps you should take your own advice," the masked man replied. To the horror of the 2 new parents, he threw the boy in his arms into the air. Minato screamed Kusina in horror and alarm. Minato jumped from his position, and in a display of speed worthy of his title, he disappeared and instantly reappeared in the air with his son in his arms. His eyes widened in horror as he heard the sounds of the explosive tags burning. He saw that the explosive tags were tied to his son's blanket. Without wasting a moment, he quickly pulled out the explosive notes and disappeared from the house to get them away from his wife and 2 other newborn children. He reappeared a second later in one of his well-hidden safe houses and placed the crying baby in a small crib. "Take care, Naruto," he said lovingly. A second later, he disappeared in a bright yellow flash. Moments after Minato disappeared, a dark clock-shaped figure slowly made its way towards the boy. It stopped right next to where the boy was and hovered over him. His blood-red eyes glowed momentarily as the man looked at the boy. The man nodded slightly, confirming something before his eyes stopped glowing, and he searched through his coat pockets. He pulled out 2 injections from the pockets of his cloak, both with a red liquid inside. He took the first syringe and injected it into the baby, who cried even louder in pain, but the man ignored him. He took the second syringe and repeated the same process. When he finished, he disappeared into nothingness, as if he had never been there. 3 months later, it had been TR months since the masked man had freed the QB from the weakened Kuzina and summoned it in the middle of the village. Many people died, both ninjas and civilians. But no. One was saved. The day marked the greatest disaster in the history of the Hidden Leaf Village, with the most of the outer sector of the village destroyed and thousands of lives lost. The great hidden village had a long way to go before it could reach its former glory. The third Kaj Rusin, Saratobi, sacrificed himself and used Shukifujin to summon the god of death and sealed the QB within an infant, and Toman Namikaze sealed the yin half of the QB within the stomach of the god of death, and the yin half within Atomi. Kusina spent 2 months in the hospital recovering from childbirth and having her stomach removed. Drue forcibly, only a few people were told that, and takes the new Jinchuriki of the strongest Biju. Everyone else was told that the third cage died, dragging the QB with him to the stomach of the Shangami, which technically wasn't a lie, just a half-truth. Although everything seemed to be going well as the village was slowly rebuilding and was getting back on its feet, not all was well in the Namikaze house. Minato and Kusina. Namikaze's youngest son, Namikaze Naruto, was in terminal phase when Minato returned to get Naruto out of the safe house after saving him from the masked man 3 months ago. He found him pale and breathing heavily. Minato rushed to the hospital to get help for his son. However, even his best doctors couldn't find what exactly was wrong with the boy. Jiraiya had once suggested that perhaps it was because Naruto's body had become dependent on the QB's chakra inside the womb, and without it he was shutting down. No, it worked well. However, that idea had been quickly discarded. If that had been the case, why wasn't Ikari, her second child, suffering the same fate in her desperation to find a cure for? Her son Minato had sent Jiraiya to find and bring Tsunade back to the village. If anyone could find out what was wrong with her son and cure him, it was her. That's where we find them currently, in the hospital room with Tsunade standing in front of the bed where a baby lay. Naruto was plugged into several machines' wires and had a breathing mask over him. His small body was frail, with very pale skin. On the top of his head, a mass of bushy blood-red hair could be seen. He looked to be on the verge of death, and the only thing keeping him alive were the beeping machines. He was hooked up to Shizen. Yelled. Tsunade, a brown-haired girl who looked to be at least 9 years old, ran into the room, holding a large file in her hands. Yes, Tsunade-sama, the girl practically shrieked. Bring me your files. I want to see all the results of your blood test, Tsunade asked, as she ran her glowing hands over Naruto. Shizen. She handed him the file she had in her hand. Tsunade took the file and began to look through all the pages after while she closed the file and walked over to the worried family who were looking at her intensely with a serious face. Tsunade looked at Jiraiya, who was leaning on the widow with his arms crossed and a gloomy look on his face. Minato was holding his 2 daughters and looking at Naruto with concern. However, Kuzuna was the worst of all. Her hair was a mess. Her eyes were swollen and red, showing that she had been crying. She had dark circles around her eyes. She was sitting in a chair that was right next to her son, looking at him with worry, love, and guilt. Tade coughed into her hand to gain all of her attention. Kusina stood up from her seat and looked at her. Minato moved a little to be in front of her. Shizen, could you leave us for a while? Shizen to Tsunade, and was about to object, but when he saw her face being Rio, nodded and walked out of the room. He knew not to question his teacher. When she was serious, whatever was going on had to be very important for her teacher to not only kick her out, but be so serious. Tsunade rarely got serious after making sure no one was listening to them, and her apprentice was out of earshot. Tsunade finally spoke. Her son is suffering from what I know, because in his body, he was injected with someone's ad of 2 people to be exact. He began. Everyone in the room gasped. He waited a few seconds so they could digest what he had just said before continuing. His body is rejecting the new ADM. That is why he is in this state. Of course, he should have died during the first few hours that his body had come into contact with the new Adam. However, due to his strengthened healing factor, his body has been slowly accepting the new ad, combining it with his Uzumaki genes, and a small amount of the QB chakra inside her body can be thanked for that. Tsunade finished. The room was silent for a few seconds before, what do you mean someone did this to her? I swear to Kami that when I have that son of a Kuzuna in my hands, I will dominate. Before said woman could continue with her murderous and angry, dwarf Kuzuna looked at her husband with anger clearly visible on her tired face. She saw the serious and worried expression on his normally calm face. She looked down at her sleeping daughters in her arms. The 2 babies stirred a bit at the noise and seemed like they were about to wake up. After a few seconds of wait, they both calmed down and went back to sleep. But that doesn't make sense. Why would someone do something like that? And more importantly, who did it? Jira asked, standing up and speaking for the first time, who did it had to be someone very powerful to be able to get into my safe house without me noticing, or was it someone close to us who knew about Kuzina giving birth, and the place where she gave birth? Minato speculated, squinting his eyes in deep thought. Oh, why is that? Jiraiya asked as Kuzina and I parted ways. I took Naruto to one of my secret safe houses that not even my personal guard Amba knows about. The house is surrounded by several barrier seals that make it nearly impossible for anyone to get into that house without a special key that only Kuzina and I have. Not only that, but anyone who tries to get into the house will set off an alarm that will exhaust me. Everyone went silent after that before Kuzin spoke. Maybe it was the masked man. He managed to get into a house guarded by the best Ambu in the village and took Naruto away before any of us could notice. His ability to teleport anywhere and turn intangible would allow him to enter easily. Kusina suggested. Minato shook his head. It couldn't have been him. I was with him throughout the entire ordeal. Maybe he sent a clone while he was fighting you, Jiraiya added. Whatever the case, still doesn't explain why they did it, Minato replied with a frustrated sigh. Can you tell us who the ad was? That Tsunade-sama asked Kusina, suddenly drawing everyone's attention to the blonde Sannin. Tsunade opened the file he was holding and skipped a few pages before stopping on a seemingly random page. He was silent for a while, or as he read the information on the page. Everyone looked at it when he suddenly froze. His eyes widened, and he began to go over the page over and over again until he dropped the file. Completely. See you. What does it say? Asked Kusina, worried. After seeing his reaction, the results show that her son was injected with the AIDS Enju Suramayuchi Madara. Both have almost completely fused with his said Tsunade. Her body was shaking slightly, and Jiraiya was doing the perfect imitation of an open-mouthed fish. It also shows that Layden will fully fuse in 2 months. By then, in all aspects, he could be considered as Senju Yukiya Uzumaki and Namike. Speaking of a long surname, added Jiraiya in tones as a joke. However, no one paid attention. Everyone was paralyzed by what they had just heard. Point in the early morning of the great village of Konoha, the sun rose slowly, enveloping the entire village with its warm golden rays. Everything was silent. As the village slowly woke up from its slumber, the wind blew, gently caressing the numerous houses and buildings. You could see some Ambu and ninjas silently jumping from roof to roof. And Naruto, Namikaze, this is the last warning. I give you, wake up. Kuzin and Namikaze's voice was heard all the way to Zna. A small red-haired boy who looked to be about 6 years old groaned from the comfort of his bed. As he reluctantly raised his head, he blinked a few times before rubbing the sand in his eyes and got up from under the covers of his bed and headed to the door. The boy gave a small sigh as he slowly opened the door and began to do a mental countdown. C3. 2 first Narcan. 2 excited screams were all the warning he got before his 2 red spots knocked him down. He groaned in obvious pain and discomfort, having experienced the same thing every morning. One would think he would have grown accustomed to this by now. However, that was not the case. And Tomi and Carrie, get off of me, said Naruto after trying and failing miserably to escape his morning death ABs, as he had called them. For a few seconds, nothing happened before 2 pairs of arms unwrapped themselves from him. Good morning, Naren, said the 2 sisters at the same time. The person Naruto saw was Akari. Like all of them, she had red hair and deep blue eyes. Her hair was long, reaching to her waist. She looked a lot like her mother when she was young, the second redhead girl. And Tommy looked a lot like Akari. And although unlike her sister, her hair was shorter, reaching just past her shoulders, her hair was a lighter red than the rest. While they were quite similar. Good morning, and Carrie-chan and Tommy-chan, you have to do this every morning. The 2 girls did, pouting and looked at him with teary eyes, lips trembling slightly and hugging each other with their faces together. Come on, Naruto, stay strong. Don't fall into the Ampa. It's just as his thoughts were interrupted when both girls' shoulders began to shake. Well, you win, he said with an annoyed sigh and muttered something under his breath that neither of the girls heard, which didn't stop Elle from instantly cheering and giving him a big hug. Narek Kuinkaken said that we had to get ready, and Carrie was the first to speak. She tried to put a serious face, and for emphasis, she put her hand on her hip, copying what she had already seen her mother redo a few times, although that only made her look prettier. Red, why? Naruto asked, now confused. He heard Tomi laugh and turned to her, waiting for her to answer. The academy starts today, remember? At this, Naruto froze, and then slowly his eyes lit up with excitement. A big smile slowly made its way onto his face, and faster than the 2 could blink, Naruto ran to the bathroom. A few minutes later, he came out wrapped in a towel. He went back to his room, and they heard clothes dragging, and when the door opened again, Naruto could be seen wearing a dark blue hooded jacket with a white shirt inside. He was also wearing black shorts and blue ninja shoes. Let's go since we're going to be late, Naruto yelled to his sisters who were still standing at their door with a dumbfounded look on their faces. Naren, it's weird, they both thought. And a second later, they followed him down the hall stairs in the kitchen. Kuzuna smiled. When she heard the footsteps coming from upstairs, her smile grew even wider when she saw her son followed by his sisters. Good morning, Kakin. Naruto greeted his mother. Good morning, Kakinbara. Good morning, Kakin. And Carrie and Tommy greeted their mother. After going down the stairs, Kuzuna walked towards her and kissed him on the forehead. The girls knew that their father usually woke up early and went to work while they were still sleeping, and seeing that he was not in the kitchen where he usually being in the morning, they knew that he had already left for work. Kuzuna knew how much her husband wanted to be there with them on their first day at the academy, but an emergency had occurred at the Okage Tower, so he had to leave earlier than usual. Good morning, Nukaneka-chan. At Token, are you all ready for your first day at the academy? The triplets nodded their heads excitedly, although she noticed that Naruto was the most excited of all. Honestly, it didn't surprise her at all. With that blood flowing with strength in her veins, it was to be expected. How about we stop at the Uraka ramen stand on the way to the academy, suggested Kusina, earning two excited squeals of agreement and a grunt of disagreement, which didn't surprise her at all. It was a surprise to everyone when they found out that Naruto, unlike his mother, father, and sisters, didn't like ramen. In fact, he hated the food. This was a surprise to everyone, especially to Kuzuna, since both she and her husband love food and hoped that all of their children would also love it, if not more. Although he had a favorite food that he loved, just like his family, he loved ramen. And that food was, for the first time he had tried it, that came as a gift from Jiraiya, who had forgotten that it was his birthday and had searched his pockets for something to give them, and had pulled out a packet of poke, while the two girls found the poke a good gift. Naruto had loved it and was obsessed to this date. Minato still cursed Jiraiya for that packet of poke that he gave to his son. Don't you worry, we will bring you some poke on the way. Before this, Naruto smiled excitedly. Nothing super to poke in the Kusina Academy, and his children planted the academy building a few meters away. He looked at his children and planted them walking a few steps in front of her. He smiled, knowingly sure they are excited, she thought to herself. She frowned a little when she noticed that Naruto covered his head with the hood of his sweater. She knew why he did it. When they found out that Naruto was part Uchiha and part Senjutade, did a bloodline test and found out that he did in fact have the ability to activate the Sharingan, but he didn't know about the first Kage would release, as it was never documented as a bloodline, and no other Senju, even his children, had awakened the would release. Jiraiya had suggested that she spread the information to the rest of the Kuzuna village, as the protective mother she was. She had rejected the idea, not wanting to aim an ever larger target towards her son. In the end, it was Minato who convinced her to ask her how they would explain to everyone how she had activated the Sharingan if she did, and that was a big if. She managed to use the wood release of the first box. In the end, she had reluctantly agreed to let them tell the villagers. In a lighter tone, Tsunade had agreed to stay in the village and was now the head of the medical department. Her reason for staying, you might wonder, well, it was actually pretty simple now. She had a living blood relative with Naruto. Having to do his grandfather was no less. Unknowingly, she had become a member of their family. So after a few hours of deep thought and weighing the pros and cons of staying, Tsunade had chosen family over adventure. She decided to stay. Both Minato and Kuzuna had asked her to become the godmother of their children, a position she tearfully agreed to. When the news reached the village, naturally everyone was shocked at first, but eventually got over it, and many accepted the news with happy faces and excited. Some, Ijin Danzo Ijin, had even gone as far as to suggest that the boy be trained as a weapon of the village. With the amount of potential the boy possessed, he would easily become powerful, a fact that many agreed with. However, their idea was quickly rejected quite painfully by a very angry Kuzuna. The Uchiha clan was the only one who was against Naruto possessing the ability to activate their precious bloodline, the Sharingan. But when Minato explained whose blood it was that had been used, and what did that mean exactly, everyone seemed to suddenly change their minds. Madara may have been considered one of the greatest Tra in the history of the Hidden Leaf Village, but no one could question his strength. After all, he was the strongest Uchiha ever born. The fact that someone alive had the same blood and hopefully had the same talent as him once in his prime easily shut them all up. The Uchiha elders improved their image of the young Namikaze by explaining to the clan as they could use it as a way to improve the reputation and power of the clan. When the boy managed to become very strong, what everyone knew would happen, they would claim, was because of his powerful Sharingan. His reputation would increase exponentially as the boy became stronger, and even better, he would show everyone, especially the Yuga clan, that Daohutsu was superior. Naruto had become the center of attention of the village, and everyone had high expectations placed on the poor boy. As Naruto grew up, many of the villagers treated him, and to a much lesser extent his sisters, like princes and princesses, what were technically shops, would often give him free food, or candy people would sometimes give him a small bow when he walked past them, and this only got worse as he grew older. Minato had to turn down marriage proposals on a daily basis from many nobles and families. Naruto was constantly the center of attention. Wherever he went, this unfortunately had the side effect of making him avoid leaving his house, and at one point refused to go to the park. On their usual family outings, most unfortunate was that he spent most of his time in the house and avoided people like a plague apart from his family. And it is sad to say, because of his aloofness and avoidance of people, Naruto did not know any children his age, and because of that he had no friends. Yari and Tomi were treated like princesses for being daughters of Ikki, but their treatment was not as severe as that of their brothers. Surely people greeted them wherever they went, and some shops gave them free candy here, and there was nothing bad enough to deter them from having a normal childhood, and unlike their distant brother, they had friends who were all children of the clan heads. Called a Kane Yuga Yada Kusina, he picked up the pace when he saw the many villagers who were looking specifically at his son and whispering to each other. As he stood next to her, he crouched down and took her hand. He looked at her confused, and she gave him an encouraging smile. He smiled back and nodded his head. Then the academy building was very close. Inside the academy, all the parents with their children were led to an empty room where the aspiring ninjas were introduced to their new sense and were shown their classes, and so the time came for each parent to say goodbye to their children and leave them in the care of their new instructors. Unfortunately, for some, what was supposed to be a simple gesture of hugs and some words of encouragement turned into an embarrassing scene. Now, remember, don't start a fight lest whatever it takes. And if you get into a fight, make sure you beat the little panka to a pulp. That way they'll know to never mess with you. QC advised his children, whose sweat dropped. What kind of advice is that they all thought? And another thing, don't let anyone bully you. If they do, tell your teacher better. Yet tell me Naruto ignored her from that point and opted to look around. He saw some adults that he recognized from one of the stores he had visited before, or from meeting them on the streets. Some children he recognized were the ones who used to play with his sisters. One of them that he clearly recognized was a girl with platinum blonde hair and light blue eyes called Kano. She used to come to his house and play with her sisters. However, although she visited his house frequently, he had never said a word to her. The other girl he recognized was a girl with indigo hair, with lavender-colored eyes without spots. Her name was Inada, heiress of the Yuga clan. From the brief encounter between the two, Naruto had noticed that she spoke very gently and was very shy. She rarely came to visit her sisters, and when she did, she was always accompanied by a guard. Before Naruto could continue with his observation, the angry scream of his mother stopped him. Naruto and Tommy and Carrie, the three children, almost jumped in fright when they heard their mother yelling at them. They looked at her and gulped when they saw the angry expression on her face. Did any of you hear what she was saying? Kusina asked with a sigh. After calming down, yes, you answered. They all asked at the same time. Kusina dropped her shoulders and muttered something under her breath that none of them heard. The instructor, who had previously addressed all of them and asked all the parents to leave since it was time for the young students to go to their classes. Kusina hugged all of her children for the last time, giving them a kiss on the forehead. She stood up, wiping the tears that threatened to fall from her eyes. Remember to stay together. I will be waiting for you at the door when the academy ends, okay? She looked at her children and pulled out a camera from somewhere she knows and asked them to stand together. Naruto was standing in the middle as he hugged Ikari to his left and Tommy to his right, both girls making a peace sign. She took the picture, and with one last gesture, she watched them walk the other students to their classes. She waited a few more seconds before wiping the fresh tears in her eyes and followed the other parents out of the classroom. They grow up so fast. When Naruto first heard that he would be attending the academy, words could not describe how happy he felt. He had begged his parents to start training them early, and they agreed. So at the tender age of 5, his parents began training them, although his sisters took the training seriously as they could for their age. Naruto was more dedicated. He practiced the precision of his Junai and Shuriken every morning for at least 3 hours, and went over the taijutsu stances his father taught them every day. Now one would wonder why would such a young child train so intensely at such a young age instead of playing with other children or doing other things that children his age would be doing. The truth was that Naruto knew that people treated him differently. He wasn't stupid by any means. However, what he didn't understand was why people treated him the way they did. Sure, his parents were very powerful and known throughout the elemental nations, but he couldn't help but feel that there was a deeper reason for the fact that everyone he knew treated him with much more respect and prestige than his sisters helped further prove his point. He hoped that by becoming powerful and building a reputation, people would finally recognize him for what he is by the name he carries. So day after day, he trained aimlessly, wanting to prove to others his own worth. When his parents told him he would be attending the academy, he became elated. This was his chance to prove himself. He couldn't help but feel dizzy thinking about things that he would learn, all the powerful jutsu and techniques that would be taught to them. Just like many children who attended the academy, he was very disappointed when during the first week of the academy, all they learned was the history of Konoha and other minor things. He honestly had no idea what those lessons had to do with being a ninja, since it was not something one could use to save their life or the life of another person. However, his sisters seemed to really enjoy the academy. Maybe it was because they spent a lot of time with their friends. Even so, apart from friends, he seriously regretted having attended the academy in the first place, and to think that he still had 6 more years before he could graduate. Less than months later, Naruto sat in his usual spot in the class, which was in the back. He looked around and saw his sisters, as always, sitting a few rows in front of him. He hadn't really changed much in the last 6 months. He still disliked the academy, and the fact that they still hadn't given him a chance to attend taught nothing worth mentioning. Annoyed, he had asked his father when they would start teaching them real ninja things. His father had chuckled and told him that they would eventually teach them. However, to Naruto's eternal frustration, his father never said when that would be, although something had happened that made him happy. He had made a new friend, his first friend to be exact. Flashback. 5 months earlier, the bell had just rung announcing recess. All the students left the classroom with great enthusiasm, and he couldn't blame them. After all, they had been freed from the boring lectures of the teachers, at least for a few minutes. Naruto walked around the schoolyard looking for a place to sit, preferably somewhere where there were no other children. He saw his sisters sitting under a tree chatting happily with their friends Yoanada and a pink-haired girl they had recently become friends with. After a few minutes of walking, he found an empty bench that was luckily hidden through some trees. He looked around to see if there was anyone around who might have been using the bench, and after finding no sign of anyone around, he sat down on the bench and was about to open his vento when he heard some movements in the nearby bushes. He waited for someone to appear, but no one appeared. However, the movements continued. Curiosity got the better of him. He stood up and walked towards the bush. He stopped right in front of said bush and spoke. "I know you're in there, you better get out," he yelled, trying and failing miserably to make her voice sound as stern and authoritative as she could, since she was so young and her body hadn't gone through puberty. Yet her voice sounded more like a cute squeak than anything else. There was a moment of silence before whoever was in the small bush began to walk out. The person who walked out was a bit taller than Naruto, meaning they had to be at least the same age as him. She was wearing a light green hooded jacket with long sleeves that completely covered her face's body from the waist up, with a high collar that hid part of his face. The hood was raised, covering most of his short, spiky dark brown hair. Inside his jacket, he wore a green shirt with dark brown pants that ended halfway down his calves. He also wore the standard dark blue shinobi shoes. Thin, round black sunglasses with wire hid his eyes. His name, as far as Naruto could remember, was Shino, heir of the Aburame clan. Like most members of his clan, he was a very quiet person who only spoke when spoken to, and even then he would only say a few words. Not that Naruto had ever spoken to him before he had noticed all of this, because they were in the same class. There was an awkward silence between the two before Naruto spoke up. "What were you doing in the bushes?" Shino raised his hand, and on his finger was a small black bug. "He was studying the types of bugs that I found here in the academy," said Shino, looking at the bug in his hand. "Oh," was Naruto's smart reply. He honestly had no answer for that. The awkwardness increased even more when the two boys stared at each other, not knowing what to do or say. "Next, by the way, my name is Naruto Nam Case." Naruto introduced himself, extending his hand. "Aburame." Shino introduced himself, raising his hand to grab and shake Naruto's gone hand at the end of the flashback. Since then, they started spending more time together, and in no time they had become good friends. His mother had felt very happy and a little relieved when he had told her that he had made a friend at the academy. She was worried that her son would never make friends of his own now. If only she could convince him to make more friends. Naruto woke up from his memory when he heard the sound of the bell that marked the end of the school day. After saying goodbye to his friend, he headed to the academy gate, where he saw Tomiari waiting for him. "Hurry up, Naruto. Kachin is not here to pick us up," she yelled, and Tommy got excited. His mother had started accepting missions again 3 months ago. She probably got bored of being alone all day, Naruto thought to himself. She usually arrived before dinner, since she didn't accept missions that would take her far from the village. She also didn't accept those that would take a long time to complete. He knew why the sisters were so excited, and to some extent he was too. His mother only allowed them to eat poi bar ramen once a week, and with how much they loved those foods, it was a torture for the four of them, including their father. So every time their mother was out like today, they visited the ramen stand, and Shirik and Naruto's case, the poke shop, and they indulged in eating several bowls of ramen and poke sticks. Speeding up the step, Naruto walked towards the door, and the three of them headed to their destinations an hour later. After their little snack, the trio headed home. As they approached their house, they all felt a deep foreboding. They felt a bit of fear slowed their pace, and slowly opened the door to their house. The house was silent, too silent. A very bad feeling slowly rose from the depths of their stomachs. Tusen Kak-chan yelled, and Tommy, nervously, his voice cracked, echoed throughout the empty house. They walked slowly towards the dining room, and were about to turn around and go up the stairs when suddenly, before they could they heard a whistle, as if something cut through the air at high speed. Following his instinct, Naruto jumped in front of his sisters. For a very tense second, everything was deathly silent before Naruto. The horrified screams of Tommy and Carrie echoed in the house that was no longer so empty. Naruto looked at them, confused, wondering what had made his sister scream his name with obvious horror. He felt something sticking out of his stomach. He looked down, and to his surprise, he found the tip of a kunai knife sticking out of his stomach. He saw that the area around the kunai was turning red. Oh, it was what the only thing he managed to say before he saw the ground approaching him and heard the screams of his sisters. Two men dressed in black ambi uniforms and white masks suddenly appeared in the room. Both held a K in each hand. However, the two distressed girls were next to their brother, crying and screaming for their brother to wake up. Completely oblivious to the two men behind them, they did not understand what was happening. All they knew was that someone had hurt their brother, and her brother was now on the ground, bleeding. Normally, in a situation like this, you would have to run out and get help. However, both girls were only 6 years old, and they were too shocked and scared to do anything, so they did what any normal girl would do. Crying, Naruto could see and hear his sisters crying, and could feel extreme pain in his stomach area. Through his blurry vision, Naruto could see two black figures slowly moving towards his sisters. He tried screaming at them to run, but every time she tried to speak, the pain intensified 10 times, and all she managed to do was try to say something that made sense. However, despite her efforts, both girls didn't even listen to what she was trying to tell them. Her mind was screaming for her body to move, but it didn't respond. Move, 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 she chanted in her mind. At the last second, just as the dark figures were about to reach her beloved sisters, she felt something warm, something powerful running through his veins like fire. The pain in his stomach suddenly disappeared. His vision cleared and became even sharper, and time slowed down for him. With a primal roar, he leapt to his feet, and with the speed of lightning, he pulled the kunai out of his stomach and stabbed it into the heart of the first Ambu. The second Ambu was shocked by what he had seen and froze for a second, a mistake that proved to be his downfall. At that very moment, Naruto, with all the strength he could muster, threw the bloody kunai into his hand on Lambo's head. He could clearly see the kunai traveling in slow motion towards the shocked man's head. He watched as it slowly sank deep into the man's head. He saw the man's eyes change from shock to horror, to finally the emptiness that accompanied the lack of life. All of this happened in a fraction of a second, and all of this was forever etched into his brain. As the man fell to the ground, Naruto blinked in surprise at what he had just done, and his surprise soon turned to horror. Before he could mutter a single word, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he fell to the ground. However, he never felt his body touch the ground, as he felt two rather soft arms catch him. The last thing he saw was a red stain and a yellow flash before everything went black. A few minutes before the cashier's office, Minato sat in his chair with a very bored look on his face. He was almost done with the day's paperwork and would soon be arriving home to his family waiting for him. He looked at the clock and saw that it was already 3 o'clock. Kuzuna hadn't shown up yet, which meant she hadn't picked the kids up from the academy. They probably stopped for ramen on the way home. She mused. Yes, she knew about their little stops. When she wasn't there to pick them up, she had discovered them one day using the crystal ball. When she was checking on them, she didn't tell Kuzuna. After all, he also ate ramen a few times during the day. Telling her wouldn't only make him a hypocrite, but it would also make her suspicious of he talking about Kuzuna. He could feel her chakra signature approaching. Mina Koi. Kuzuna burst into his office. Without knocking, he smiled at her and got up to kiss her. How was the mission? She asked him after breaking the kiss. Same as always. I had to kick an evil mercenaries ass, Kuzuna replied unconsciously, adding her verbal tick to the end of her statement. Minato just sweat dropped at the vague mission statement. She gave him. Are you ready to go home, or should I continue without you? He asked her. am I done let me grab my jacket, and I'll take you both home in the house. When both parents returned home, they immediately knew something was wrong. On one hand, they could both smell blood in the house. Minato couldn't sense any of the Ambos who were always protecting his house and his children, and last, but most important, their ninja instincts were telling them something was wrong. One doesn't get far in the ninja career and doesn't listen to their instincts because they're almost always wrong. Now on guard, husband and wife headed to the dining room, where Reader Blood was stronger. Out of the corner of his eye, Minato could see Kusina struggling not to rush there to see if her children were safe. Only years of being a kunoichi stopped her barely. When they finally got to the dining room, what they found shocked them, and Carrie and Tommy were kneeling on the floor with tears in their eyes, looking over to where Naruto was standing with his hand outstretched with a large amount of blood on his stomach and hands. They looked more specifically at his eyes. They were shocked to see two red eyes with a single shot at each eye looking at the dead figure with a kunai engraved on its head. Kusina was the first to recover from her shock as she saw its eyes turn from their normal deep blue and roll to the back of its head. She moved quickly and caught it before it could reach the ground. Minato recovered a second after. Kusina instantly created two shadow clones which disappeared after nodding. She then approached the Ambu to check if they were dead and saw that they were indeed dead. After that, he went to see if his daughters were hurt and saw that they were okay and were just traumatized. He pressed the back of their necks and they both fell into his arms, unconscious, which gave them a chance to recover from the shock. Kusina had caught his son before he hit the ground and instantly realized that he was pale, probably from the loss of so much blood. He cradled him in his arms and turned to see Minato holding his daughters who were passed out in his arms. Now extremely worried, quickly expressed her concern and her question, "What's wrong?" she asked, trying to stop herself from breaking down and panicking, which she knew would only make things worse. "They're both okay, just a little traumatized. I knocked them out so they could rest." "How is Naruto?" he replied, showing much more control over his emotions than his wife. "From what I can tell, he's lost a lot of blood. We have to take him to the hospital, and immediately before his situation gets worse with this." Minato, he nodded and walked over to where his wife was holding their son. She grabbed his shoulder, and there was a flash of yellow light. As the light went out, everyone was gone. They never noticed a single plant root spread across the ceiling in the hospital. The only warning the hospital staff received was a flash of yellow light before the fourth cashier suddenly appeared with his family. Seeing the limp and bloody children, Tsunade, who had luckily been at the front desk collecting some files, doctors quickly ran towards the family, caught the attention of some nurses who were working, and guided the family to an empty emergency room and quickly took care of the injured children. Less than 2 hours later, after 2 hours of waiting, the emergency doors opened and Tun came out. Kusina immediately ran towards her with Minato not far behind. "How are you?" asked Kusina, worried. Her eyes were red from crying so much and new tears were already accumulating so much. And Tomikomo and Karar also have no physical injuries. However, both are traumatized and will probably suffer nightmares for a few days, explained Tsunade, receiving a sigh of relief from both parents. "On the other hand, your son lost a lot of blood. This caused his body to go into shock during the operation. It took us several minutes to stabilize him before we could give him the pills to replenish the blood. He was the most traumatized, and I had to put him in a state similar to a drug-induced coma to allow his body and his mind will heal completely." Both parents fell silent before Minato asked Tsuna a question that was plaguing his mind. "How long will he be in a coma? With his healing rate higher than normal, he should be awake in a week. I suggest one of you be here when he wakes up." Seeing a familiar face might help. The two worried parents nodded and let out the breath neither of them knew they were holding now. "Could one of you tell me what happened to my godchildren?" he asked Tsunade. Sternly, Minato sighed and looked at his wife, who was already at her children's bedside, looking at them with so much love and concern, deep emotions that only a mother could express. "We arrived." And so Minato explained to Tsunade how they had arrived at their house to find their daughters crying on the floor and Naruto standing in front of two corpses. Tsunade was shocked and horrified by what she had been told, having guessed that Naruto at 6 years old had already committed his first kill. A week later, the first thing he felt when he woke up was a terrible headache and the constant ringing that didn't get better. He opened his eyes slowly and closed them quickly when a bright light assaulted him, and his eyes hurt. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes again and looked towards the window. He noticed that there was light outside. It was probably midday. Confusing with each passing second, he sat up in bed and tried to remember how he had gotten there. As if a dam was exploding, his memories came back to him, and he remembered everything: how he had been stabbed in the stomach with a kunai while saving his sisters. He took said kunai, he stabbed it deep into the man's heart, and threw it with deadly accuracy at the other man's head. The lifeless expressions of the men looked at him. The images played over and over in his head. He did the only thing he could do. He let out the loudest scream he ever could. He held his head with both hands as he continued to scream. He never heard the door open. All he felt was the warm presence of his mother hugging him. He slowly stopped screaming and started crying as his mother continued to hold him and was now making cooing sounds to calm him down. After 30 minutes of crying, his whimpers calmed down and turned into small sobs. "I'm not sorry, Kei-chan in. I didn't mean Emmy," Naruto yelled. I know, it's okay. No one's going to hurt you. Kei-chan is here," Kuzuna said sweetly with tears running down her face. This continued for another hour before Naruto finally fell asleep in her arms. By then, she was humming a soft tune to help calm him down and thus allow him to fall asleep. She looked towards the door and saw Minato Sanade, almost standing there looking at her. She blinked and wondered how long they had been standing there. His face turned serious as he addressed them. "Have you already found out who was responsible?" he asked, not looking at any of them, but at his sleeping son. "I'm afraid not. Whoever it was, he made sure to cover his tracks. I had Inoichi search the minds of the dead, Ambu. However, their minds already, they had been erased. Apparently a memory seal had been placed on them to erase their memories in case they had been caught dead." Minato replied to her with his hands clenched, clearly angry. Kuzuna's hair slowly rose and began to flow angrily into the air behind her. "When I find out who is responsible, I will make sure they suffer death," she said grimly. And Kakashi, who had been silent the entire time, slowly backed away from the rising, killing intent Kuzuna was releasing. Fortunately for him, Naruto, who was still sleeping, moved a little. His body trembled slightly. Instantly, the K disappeared, and Kuzuna now held her son even closer and murmured soft words to him. Everyone in the room sweated a drop from the 180-degree change that had just happened. Women thought the two men location unknown in a dark building. Hidden underground was an old man with a bandage covering his left eye and his left hand wrapped in bandages, holding his staff in front of two men kneeling in front of him. "Report mission successful, Danzo-sama. The subject, Namikaze Naruto, has awakened to Sharingan and has shown signs of using the wood release," one of the men reported emotionlessly. Danzo nodded his head, hit the ground with his staff, and the two men disappeared. "Well, with the boy's power growing steadily, and at such a young age, he will become a force to be reckoned with. When he grows up, it's a shame I couldn't accept him under my foundation," thought Danzo, as he turned around and walked towards his own office. 3 days after Naruto woke up from his coma, he had been discharged from the hospital. He had been dreading the day he would have to go back home. It's not that he didn't love his home or anything, but he just wasn't willing to go back to the place where he had killed someone. Luckily for him, his parents have foreseen this and were about to move into a new house. When Sanade suggested they come live with her, the Senju, which in all honesty, it was large enough to house several families and still have extra rooms, the young couple had initially been against the idea, not wanting to impose themselves. However, Sanade had responded by saying that if she had wanted more privacy, she would have bought a smaller house. As if she could afford it. To persuade them further, she had even suggested that it would be better for them to move in with her, so she could keep an eye on her children, especially Naruto. She could help him more if she had more time with him, and so with a little hesitation they had agreed to it, much to his growing joy. So when instead of going to his home, Naruto found himself being led to a completely different house. Naruto asked his mother where they were going. She smiled reassuringly at him and told him that they were moving in with his grandmother. He felt relieved and scared at the same time, relieved that he wouldn't have to go back to his new home, and scared because his grandmother's hugs were far more painful than his sister's morning death hugs. The trip to the Senja house, it seemed a lot longer than he remembered. Maybe it was because he was more self-aware now than before. The looks of the villagers had gone from admiration and respect to pity. It seemed that the news of his attack had spread throughout the village rather quickly. Now he could hear them more than ever muttering to themselves about him and his sisters, who were united. Many of the people they passed offered their apologies. Naruto found himself getting angrier with each apology he received. He didn't want it that he wanted them to respect him for his actions. The fact that he was thinking about how people would have respected him more for killing two Ambu didn't matter to him. He wanted them to talk about how he, at the age of 6, had managed to kill, not yet, but too ambu to save his sisters, not to offer him pity. What was pity for? He decided at that moment that he hated pity more than anything. Unconsciously, his Sharingan activated with the only tome spinning. Angrily, he didn't hear the gasp of surprise from the people when he did that, nor did he feel his mother placed her hand on his shoulder. Kuzuna had been watching her son. She could feel his anger slowly rising every time a villager offered him words of pity. She could understand why he was angry. No one likes to be pitied, and with so many people willingly showing so much pity, his anger was starting to show. His Sharingan activated, and he could feel it releasing a very small amount of K, which in all honesty was quite impressive for a 6-year-old. Wanting to calm him down, he put his hand on her shoulder. He frowned when he noticed that she hadn't even reacted to his touch. Later at the Senju house, upon arriving at the Senju house, both mother and son entered a rather large house. Naruto already knew the layout of the house, so the need to explore had been satiated for a long time. The house was very quiet, which gave Naruto a feeling of déjà vu, something he didn't like. He wondered where everyone was, as if reading his mother. She replied, "No. Everyone is they are at home. Right now your grandmother was kind enough to allow us to live here." Naruto nodded in approval and relief. They moved into the living room, where Naruto sat on the large couch with his mother sitting beside him. "Would you like to talk about it?" he asked, not mentioning what it was exactly, that knowing he knew exactly what she was talking about. He shook his head in disagreement. Kuzuna nodded at that. She was hoping he wouldn't want to talk about it. "It's fine if you don't want to talk about it right now, but when you're ready, come to me, and we can talk about it." "Okay, dear." Naruto nodded. Once more, they fell silent. Kuzuna took a deep breath, preparing herself for what she had originally wanted to talk about. Naruto began. Naruto, who had been staring at the floor, looked at his mother. She had addressed him by his full name instead of his usual Naren. She rarely called him by his full name, except when she was angry or when he had done something wrong. She also seemed nervous, evident by how she shifted a little in her seat. Whatever she wanted to say had to be very important for her to act like that. Kuzuna took a deep breath. She had decided to be the one to tell her son about it. Minato had agreed with her. With a little hesitation, his son was closer to his mother, so he knew the best person to tell him would be Kuzuna. He knew her son was intelligent for his age and would understand what they would tell him. It was his reaction. What he feared, it was for that same reason that they refrained from telling their other children about it. They did not want their children. They began to treat their brother differently, although there was little chance of that happening with how much the two girls loved and adored their brother. It was always better to be safe than sorry, and so Kuzuna told her son how he had been injected with the Aliram in Uchiha Madara just hours after being born. However, she didn't tell him about the masked man, or that the Kyuubi was sealed inside his sister. And Tommy, after his mother finished speaking, Naruto fell silent. His young mind tried to digest everything he had just heard. Then suddenly everything started to make sense to him, because everyone treated him like a prince. He contained within his blood the ad of the strongest people in the history of the Leaf Village. He knew exactly who those two men were. After all, he had read several books about them. Aram Senju, the first Kage, the god of shinobi, the man who single-handedly captured all the tailed beasts except the Kyuubi and delivered them to each hidden village as an act of trust between the villages. The man who is said to have created the forest that surrounds Konoha, one of the strongest men ever born. Then there was Madara, co-founder of Konoha, the strongest Uchiha ever born, the man who could destroy an army single-handedly and keep fighting. The only man who could fight is Sarama on equal terms. And let's not forget his own parents, his father, the fourth Kage, the fastest man in the world, a man who killed an entire army with one technique, ending the third great shinobi war. His mother was no slouch either. One of the most powerful women in the world. It is said that her sword skills are equal to or greater than those of the 7 great swordsmen of Kiri, one of the strongest women in the world, only surpassed by Tsunade Senju. All of these great and powerful, very powerful, and he was related to them. No one said it, but he knew that everyone except him surpassed them. Suddenly, he felt as if the entire weight of the world was on his shoulders. How could he even expecting to become that strong? Could he even become that strong? It wasn't fair, he thought to himself. Why was he, of all the people in the world, given so much responsibility? Why, of all the children born that day, had he been injected with his? For the first time in his life, Naruto became jealous of his sisters, jealous of the fact that everyone treated them normally, jealous that they had made so many friends while he only had one. Not that he had anything against his only friend, but he wanted more. He wanted to play with others' children like his sister. did a small part of him, a part he had. Buried long ago, deep inside himself, hated them for it. He hated how his life was. He hated how everyone treated him. He hated how unfair his life was. And he hated whoever it was that had given him those genes without Naruto knowing his Sharingan that had been active since he had unconsciously activated it on the streets had been spinning faster and faster as his thoughts grew darker and darker. When he finally slowed down, instead of a tome in each eye, there were now two tomos in both eyes. Kuzuna looked at her worried, wanting to know how she would react to what she had told her. She watched as her face changed emotions from deep thought, uncertainty, jealousy, and finally anger. Her body began to tremble with evident anger, wanting to calm him down. She took his small, soft hand in hers and squeezed it a little to support herself and get his attention. When he looked at her, she almost jaded when she saw the two tomos in his eyes instead of one with which she had seen him for the first time. He has already progressed it to the second stage so quickly, she thought, proudly and amazed at the same time. Her son had awakened it only a week ago, and now he had progressed it to the second stage. Not even Itachi, the Uchiha prodigy, had managed to mature his so quickly. He couldn't wait until he could tell Makoto. He could only imagine the look on her face when he told her how her son had managed to progress his Sharingan to the second stage a week after awakening it. It would be priceless, Naruto. So that means I'm related to Bakon by blood. Kuzuna blinked at that of the question she had to ask. She didn't expect him to ask that. Yes, I suppose, yes. I can also use the Sharingan like the other Uchiha. Kuzuna first chuckled and then proceeded to laugh. You haven't realized, right? She asked, and Naruto shook his head. Yes, you can use the Sharingan like the other Uchiha, intact. You've had it active the whole time. Naruto blinked at that. He had it active. So why didn't it feel different now that he thought about it? Everything seemed different. Everything he saw much clearer, and his mother seemed to glow. Blue Yachty felt tired either from having his new bloodline active for who knows how long, or from having to digest so much information in one day. He didn't know. Why don't you go get some rest? I see you're tired, she suggested, to which he nodded. She stood up and headed upstairs. Your room is the third on the right. Naruto continued his way up the stairs until he reached his new room, almost the same as the previous one. But there were some differences here and there, but the room looked practically the same. Instead of going straight to bed, Naruto walked over to the dresser that was in his room. He looked in the mirror, more specifically at his eyes. So this is a Sharingan, he asked himself, looking at the two red eyes with the two tomos in them. Now, how did he turn it off the next day? Naruto slowly opened his eyes to find that he wasn't in his room. He was about to freak out when he remembered that they had moved in with his grandmother. He felt tired. He had slept a lot the previous nights. First, it had taken him about an hour to learn how to turn off his char. Then when he finally went to bed to take a well-deserved rest, another problem arose. Every time he closed his eyes, the images of that dead man he killed would instantly appear in his mind, forcing him to stay awake most of the night. He slowly sat up from the bed and walked to the door, although he was a little disappointed not to hear two shouts of his name, as usual, nor the morning death hugs he was so used to. He went downstairs, and to his surprise, he found everyone sitting around the kitchen table chatting happily as they enjoyed their morning breakfast. Even his father, who by this time normally had already left for work, was also there. Naruto-kun, Shizen, his older sister figure, was the first to notice him. Everyone stopped talking and looked at him. Good morning, Non. And how are you feeling today? His mother asked him in a loving tone. I'm fine, she answered him in a low voice, something who barely paid attention to him. His grandmother stood up and with a gleam in her eyes walked towards him like a hungry lion. Akira, it's pray good morning. Naruto-kun, come give your back on a morning hug. Naruto took a step back and was about to turn around and run for his life when he suddenly found his face buried deep within his grandmother's generous bust, and the life was squeezed out of him. Luckily for him, his savior arrived in the form of Shizen, who had seen his face turn blue. Tsunade-sama, I think I should let go Naruto-kun. Before he passed out, Tsunade pouted slightly before letting him go. Naruto sent Shizen a grateful look for saving him. Good morning, son. How did you sleep? His father asked him with a slightly amused look on his face after seeing his interaction with Tsunade. Was it nice? He said in the same tone he had used to answer his mother, like, yes, I barely got any sleep. He yelled angrily in his mind. He looked at his sisters who were staring at him in silence. He had hoped they would be the first in greeting him. Instead, both girls were silent, something he never thought was possible, and they looked at him nervously. They are afraid of me, he thought, worried. Maybe they were afraid he could hurt them. He couldn't get the images of those men he had killed out of his mind. He wondered how his sisters saw him now. They thought he was a monster for killing those men. He looked at them both directly in the eyes, and they both looked away. Then they are afraid of me, He thought sadly, his eyes filled with tears before blinking away tears, and Carrie and Tommy were nervous their brother had risked his life to save them, and the worst part of it all was that he had to kill two men to save them. They were both ashamed and worried at the same time, ashamed of themselves for not even trying to fight, ashamed that their brother, the youngest of them, had to fight for them and even got hurt in the process. They were also worried about what he would think of them. He would hate them for not helping him, angry that they did what she said goodbye to when those two men were about to kill them. "Why don't you join us for breakfast? Your food isn't the warmer?" the mother suggested, unknowingly interrupting her children's depressive thoughts. Naruto shook his head. "No thanks, I'm not hungry," he said as he left the room. Some time later, Naruto walked aimlessly through the streets of Konoha, ignoring their usual whispers. He didn't care about Nting at that moment. His sisters, the people he loved, were more afraid of him than anything else in this world. His chest tightened the pain. He felt it was unlike any other. It hurt so much more than when the kunai had stabbed him in the stomach. It felt like 1,000 daggers were being stabbed constantly in and out of his heart. What was he going to do? He didn't realize he had entered the local park he once refused to go to. He was about to turn around when he saw them, his two sisters, sitting on the swings, gently moving back and forth. The lump in his throat suddenly increased slowly with increasing steps. Hesitantly, he walked towards them, and Carrie-chan and Tommy-chan, both girls, stiffened a little. Not noticing he had been there, Naruto asked Yamo, and Tommy, looking up, Naruto swallowed the lump in his throat before he spoke. "That I just wanted to say that I'm sorry for killing those two men." He swallowed hard, his voice cracking even more. "And even that if you're afraid of me, I'll always love you." And whatever he was going to say was cut off when both girls threw him to the ground, sobbing. "What?" he asked, surprised. "We are sorry you got hurt saving us," he said. And Tommy, between dull, "We are scared of you. Nothing you do will scare us," continued Akari. The two girls continued apologizing. The pain in her heart instantly vanished. All her worry for the fear her sisters had of her vanished. They continued hugging like that for a few more minutes before getting up. "Let's go get something from home. I'll treat Naruto," suggested, rubbing the remains of tears in his eyes. His sisters cheered before taking his hands and dragging him to the ramen stand. Seeing their sister smile happily as they dragged him, Naruto made a promise to himself. He would protect his sister. He would become strong enough to protect them against anyone or anything. He would go through hell and back if it meant he could protect them. And if anyone hurt them, his Sharingan activated, spinning madly. He would hunt them down to the ends of the earth and make them pay. It had been a few days ever since Naruto had had his little heart-to-heart talk with his sisters, and everything had gone back to normal. That, of course, was what he would have expected to say, but unfortunately, it wasn't. Even though the relationship between him and his sisters had been repaired, strengthened, there was even one problem that little Naruto had to solve. No matter how hard he tried, no matter what he tried, Naruto couldn't sleep. He couldn't forget the images of the dead H-man staring at him with those dead, haunting eyes. So he had slept very little in the last few days, evident by the dark circles that had developed around his eyes. Suba-chan had suggested that he refrain from going to the academy for a few days, and his mother had stopped taking missions again, so she could spend the days with him and monitor his health. Kuzuna was in the kitchen preparing a meal for her, and her son thought sadly. She was very worried about him. She could see that he wasn't getting enough sleep lately, and he was becoming paranoid of his surroundings, and she knew the reason behind it. Everyone knew it. Tsunade had suggested him to wait for him to come to her and tell her about his sleeping problems. However, he was getting impatient, motherly demands screaming for him to help his distressed son, but he had stood his ground and had not given up. He looked out through the kitchen window and saw his son sitting in the swing, pushing himself absent-mindedly. Instantly, his will broke it with Tsunade. "My baby needs me," he screamed in his mind. He left what was doing and walked out, heading towards his son with a determined look on his face. Naruto Naruto almost jumped in fright when he heard his voice. Kazan said, "Surprise." Kuzuna, with his head with a smile, and moved behind him and began to gently push him. "Is something wrong, Naruto? Something you want to talk about?" he asked carefully, without mentioning what he meant. Naruto stopped before shaking his head. Kuzuna sighed to himself. He could use a little more help. Naren, when people have problems with something, talking to someone usually helps. Even I sometimes talk to Tuten when I have problems, just like he does the same when he has problems. Naruto looked at her, surprised. Seriously? She nodded at him before smiling and stopped pushing him, moving in front of him. She knelt down his level and took his two small hands in hers, giving him a warm, motherly look, and with a very soft and gentle voice, She spoke to him. I will do it. Now, Nara-chan, tell your kakin what has been worrying you. Naruto looked at her Rigeso. Seeing that his hands were covered by his mother's, he was silent for a moment. I can't sleep, he said in a low voice, but Kuzuna heard him. Why can't you sleep, he insisted. Every time I try to sleep, he stopped there and took a deep breath. I keep seeing the dead person always looking at me, and I end up not sleeping. He ended up with his head still down, and a small tear fell on his hands. Kuzuna hugged him instantly. Ar-chan continued crying for a few more minutes before lowering him enough for Kuzuna to talk to him. You know, I too reacted the same way as you when I killed someone for the first time. He started rubbing the remains of his tears with his hand. You did, yeah. And you know what your grandmother told me at that moment? Naruto shook his head. She said, when you kill someone, remember why you did it. Was it for money, for revenge? Or was it to protect the ones you hold dear in your heart? Form your own nindo, and always follow it no matter what happens. Your own nindo, he said softly. Yes, a nindo is a rule. Why you live your own way, little girl. What is your nindo? Kazan asked Naruto curiously. I never go back on my words, and I will always protect my family at all costs, she said passionately before standing up and kissing him on the forehead and walking back to the house. Her work was done. My own nindo. Later that day, Kuzuna was sitting at the kitchen table writing some seals on scrolls to pass the time, and she stopped what she was doing when she heard some small footsteps heading towards her. He looked up from the scroll and saw his son standing in the doorway. Nervously, he raised one at that. Kazan was wondering if you would please allow me to go to the Uchiha clan library. He blinked a few times and slowly thought about what Kazan had said. I was wondering if you could please allow me to go to the Uchiha clan library. Instead of exploding like Naruto expected, Kuzuna narrowed her eyes. And tell me why you want to go to that library. Naruto shifted a little before answering. I thought about what you said before about forming my own nindo, and I came up with one of my own. Kuzuna nodded, wondering where he was going with this, and also wanted to hear the kind of nindo he had come up with. My nindo is that I will become the strongest ninja in the world and protect my family and precious people with my own life. Kuzuna gave him a proud smile. I am very proud of you, Ar-chan, but that still doesn't explain why you want to go to the Uchiha clan library, she said with her eyes softening. As I want to become very strong, I want to master my Sharingan to help me get stronger, and the only place I can learn how to use it is in that library. Naruto replied. Kuzuna looked at him and thought about telling him about Kakashi and asking him to help him with his Sharingan, but decided against it. It will help him learn the value of hard work, she thought to herself. I'll let you go. Naruto was about to celebrate when she interrupted him, but he was only there for an hour, and after attending the academy tomorrow, she finished in a tone of firmness. Naruto was visibly discouraged at that, but gave her a Naruto smiles before going to his room. Thanks, Kazan, Naruto yelled to his mother as he excitedly headed to his room. He had to get ready for the academy tomorrow. At the academy the next morning, Naruto entered the academy building with his sisters by his side. His head is covered by the hood of his jersey. Some of the students, those who saw him, were giving him looks of admiration. Some were giving him looks of fear, and some looks of envy. He did not pay attention to them and continued on his way towards his class. When he entered the classroom, everyone went silent, all their attention and eyes fixed on his form. He walked to the back of the class where he usually sat. Sitting down, he looked at his only friend who was sitting next to him, wanting to see his reaction. Shino looked at him and nodded. Welcome back, said Shino with his usual stoic face. Thank you, replied Naruto with a small smile on his face. Naruto nodded and looked towards the front of the class where his sensei had just entered and was now teaching. A small smile was drawn on his face. Shino, despite his calmness, was a very good friend, did not judge him like all the other students, and instead accepted him as he was without asking questions. A true friend. After the academy, instead of going straight home, Naruto began to walk towards another sector of Konoha. His sisters had asked him where he was going, but he had only told them that he would return later. They had tried to convince him to take them with him, but his mother had come to his rescue and had convinced them to let him go alone. While Naruto walked towards the Uchiha district, he was very aware that the Yulos were following him since he had woken up from the hospital. He had been able to sense people, so to speak, and knowing his father, his grandmother, and his mother, it wouldn't surprise him if some ambu followed his every footprint. The Uchiha district was quite far from the village, so it took him a while to get there. When he got to the Uchiha district, Naruto headed to the clan head's house. Going through a lot, Uchi on the way was a little surprised by the many respectful looks of approval he was receiving from many of them. Although there were some who were giving angry and disapproving looks, he arrived at the house that was in the middle of the clan compound. It was several times larger than the other houses and more spacious. He knocked on the door and stopped knocking when he heard a female voice answer. I'm coming. He waited a few seconds before hearing the door open. The person who opened it was a woman with long, straight black hair and black eyes. She was wearing a purple blouse with a red skirt and a yellow apron. She looked around in confusion before her eyes landed on the small red-haired boy at her door. She blinked in surprise before smiling warmly at him. Naruto-kun, what are you doing here? He asked, opening the door wide for him to enter. Good afternoon, Makoto Basa, started Naruto. After entering the house, I was wondering if I could talk to Fugaka-sama. Makoto seemed like she was about to ask what it was he wanted to talk about with her husband, but stopped when she heard her husband coming down the stairs. She looked back and saw said husband coming down the stairs, and it seemed like he heard everything. Naruto, follow me to my study, where we can talk in private, said Fugaka, seriously looking at his wife, who had the decency to blush. Naruto said, turning to the north, and followed him up the stairs to the study. In the study, Naruto sat nervously watching as Fugaka looked at him with a very curious look. After what seemed like an eternity for Naruto, Fugaka finally spoke. You wanted to see me? It was not a question. Naruto nodded his head slightly before speaking. Fugaka-sama, I would like to ask you to grant me permission to enter the Uchiha clan library. For a long time, Fugaka was silent, making Naruto nervous. Why would he grant you such a privilege? Many of our clan secrets are documented within the library, Fugaka said seriously with his eyes half closed. I understand that, but since I woke up my Sharingan, I've been reading up on how to best use it. However, most of the things I've read are common knowledge, Naruto said. Fugaka agreed with him on that point. Most, if not all, clans keep the knowledge of their techniques a secret from anyone outside their clan, so he wasn't all that surprised that Naruto had come to him seeking access to his clan library, though he had expected the young man to arrive at a much later date. Not at this age. No, while still he was so young, allowing him access to the library will possibly earn us a favor with the Okage, and it will look good on our image if the boy keeps coming here. Not to mention the clan elders would complain if they knew I turned him down. Thought. Fugaka looked at Naruto for a few more seconds and smiled a little when he saw him shift in his seat nervously. The library is at the end of the premises. He gave Naruto his answer, his face still serious. And remember, whatever you learn inside the library must never be revealed to anyone else. He finished, leaking a small amount of K at the end and putting extra emphasis on never will not. Naruto snapped and blushed in embarrassment when he realized what he had said. Done. Make sure you don't, replied Fugaku in a slightly amused tone and motioned for Naruto to leave. Thank you, Fugaka-sama, said Naruto, bowing his head and walking out of the room. When he opened the door, he was surprised to find Sasuke falling inside. Naruto realized he had been listening to them. He looked at the fallen figure of Sasuke and extended his hand to help him up. However, Sasuke just huffed and ignored his hand and stood up on his own. Naruto blinked, then shrugged before walking out. He gave Sasuke one last curious look and saw said boy looking at him angrily and jealously. He blinked again and walked out. What's your problem? Walking, Sasuke, and closed the door behind you. Sasuke gulped when he heard his father say that to Naruto. As they reached the library, Naruto entered the building and was shocked to find an inscription at the gate. Only those of true Uchiha blood can access the knowledge within these walls. The ability to understand our knowledge is hidden within those of Uchiha blood. He stopped to think for a moment before entering inside the library. He saw several sections branching into 3 different parts. Sharingan Jutsu history. He read out loud. He almost jumped towards the Jutsu section, but stopped. First things first, he thought. Walking towards the Sharingan section, he searched for the book that was searching and found it on the top of the shelf. He almost screamed in frustration when he realized he was too short to reach the book he needed. He was about to go find someone to help him when a tall figure took the book and looked at it before handing it to him. He accepted the book and looked at the person who had given it to him and saw a teenager who looked to be at least 15 years old. The boy had short, disheveled black hair and was wearing a dark-colored turtleneck suit with a somewhat tied on the right side of the back of his shoulders. Thank you, Naruto, thanked the young teen, who smiled at him. No problem. By the way, I'm Shursui, the one now called Shursui, introduced himself. Naruto introduced himself, knowing that Shursui knew who he was. Almost everyone knew who Shursui was. He looked at him curiously, as if there was something he wanted to say, but he held back. Well, I gotta go. It was nice meeting you, Naruto, Sen said, Shizu turning around and stopped for a second when she heard Naruto's small response. A pleasure meet you too. Shursui, Sen smiled and continued walking. After seeing an empty table, Naruto walked over to the empty seat and sat down. He opened the book, and after flipping through the contents page looking for the information he wanted, Naruto found the page number listed under skills. He opened the page and was surprised to find it blank. He remembered the inscription on the door. He activated his Sharingan and was pleased and surprised when the words of the book materialized before his eyes. He briefly wondered how they had done before he continued and began to read. The Sharingan grants the user various ocular powers. As Naruto finished reading, he looked at the clock and saw his eyes widened in shock. In horror, 3 hours had passed without even bothering to close the book or put it back on the shelf. He ran out of the library. As if it was on fire, it was already dark outside. He realized alarmed Kakin is going to kill me. He screamed in his mind as he ran as fast as his little legs could carry him to the arriving at the house. He slowed his pace, took a few breaths to calm himself, and entered slowly. He opened the door slowly and almost screamed when the first thing he saw was the angry image of his mother, standing a few meters from the door with her hands crossed and her left foot tapping the ground in rage. "Good night, Kakin." He began nervously. "Naruto Koen," said Kusina sweetly, too sweetly. "That yes," Kakin stuttered. Naruto took a step back and almost screamed in horror when he realized that the wall was right behind him and there was no one else place he could run. His eyes almost filled with tears as his hair began to rise and swing in a ponytail that looked like 9 tails. His eyes took on a bright image. "How long did you say you would last?" Kusina asked, taking a slow predatory step towards him. 1-1h, or his angry glare killing slash increased 10 times, and Naruto could swear he saw his life flash before him. "And how long did it take you?" Naruto almost peed his pants at that moment. "T3 hours." He took another step forward, and Naruto, he tried to break through the wall and run. For his life, he finally caught up with him, and faster than he could react, she grabbed him by the back of the neck and lifted him up to eye level with an astonishing display of strength. "Do you have any idea how worried I was the next time you decide to stay by Cammy knows how long? Make sure you tell someone," she screamed, shaking the poor terrified boy like a rag doll. "From now until I decide when you're grounded. Now what do you have to say in your death?" She fluttered her rant and blinked as she saw him staring at her with a blank stare, with a white shape coming out of his mouth. Naruto Kusina shook him a few times, wanting to get a reaction out of him. Kusina was about to run and take him to Tsunade when she turned around and saw everyone waiting for her other 2 sons staring at her, barely containing their laughter from the commercial scene between mother and son. Tsunade calmed down and walked towards them. She placed her hand that was glowing green on Naruto's forehead. "Don't worry about him. He's just unconscious. You should take him to bed." Kusina nodded and almost skipped up the stairs to carry her son to bed when he was out of sight. Tsunade and Minato burst out laughing. Shizen's laughter was muffled by the sleeve she was holding over her face. Time skipped 2 years later. Fire-style dragon fire jutsu, a large dragon made purely of fire, rushed towards the training dummies at the end of the small clearing, and when it hit an explosion the size of 100 explosive tags that they exploded at the same time, it echoed throughout the training field. When the explosion calmed down, only the charred ground remained of what were once 3 training dummies. An 8-year-old red-haired boy could be seen smiling with satisfaction at the destruction caused by the fire. "Drag yada. I finally mastered it," Naruto said out loud. Not much had changed, and Naruto still wore the same outfit he wore 2 years ago, and the only noticeable difference in him was that he was a few inches taller, and instead of the 2 he took in each Sharingan, I was now 3. Naruto had managed to fully mature his Sharingan TR months ago, while having a taijutsu training with his father, well, a clone of his father to be precise. He was so excited about it that he kept it active for almost a whole month, turning it off only when he was about to sleep or when he was inside the house. His rather upset mother scolded him for showing his skills, and like a true ninja, he would keep his skills a secret to surprise his enemies. After that, he stopped showing it a year before his parents had decided to tell his sisters about his condition. They took it quite well, and Tommy even went so far as to say that no matter what they said or did, they would always love him and see him as their brother no matter what happened. However, not everything was perfect in his life. It never was since that day 2 years ago when he asked permission to enter the Uchiha clan library. Sasuke had begun to throw hateful glances and always asked him to pair him with during taijutsu training in class. And when he lost, which was every time, he would get very angry and storm off. He didn't know what his problem was, and honestly, it didn't matter to him. Sasuke was acting like a spoiled brat who couldn't stand anyone being stronger than him. Something else had happened at the academy. He didn't know when or how it started. One day, the day he would curse forever, many of the girls at the academy had decided that he had the best boyfriend material, and suddenly they had in love with him, which led him to have the only thing he had never dreamed of, having fans. And the leader of said group was none other than Ino Yamanaka, and her friend Bara Rival was the leader of the Sasuke fan club. Sakura Runo wondered what had happened to her. From what he remembered, she used to be such a quiet and shy girl, but now she was different. The only thing that happened and that made him smile was that he had discovered many jutsus in the Uchiha clan library. Apparently, they were classified according to which one you had mastered. The Sharingan Ed-ranked jutsus were accessible to those who activated the first stage of the Sharingan. CB-ranked jutsus were accessible to those who had managed to activate the second stage. Ba-ranked jutsus were accessible to those who had fully matured their Sharingan, though. He had tried to read the S-rank section and found that he couldn't, which made him wonder if perhaps there was another stage of the Sharingan that the Bara people he didn't know about, or perhaps they were only accessible by a special password. When he told his parents about how he had access to CB-ranked jutsu from the library, both parents immediately stopped him from reading and trying to use those ninjutsu, stating that it was too dangerous for him to attempt such a dangerous jutsu at such a young age after a long session in which he tried to convince them to let him try them. Thanks to Kami for the puppy dog eyes jutsu, they agreed. Although they gave him some rules to follow. First, he had to master 3 CB-ranked jutsu before she could attempt any C-ranked jutsu. Secondly, she was only allowed to learn 5 C-ranked jutsu. She would only be allowed to attempt a B-ranked jutsu after she had completely mastered all C-ranked jutsu and gained the approval of both parents. And lastly, she was only allowed to learn 1 B-ranked jutsu. She immediately hugged her parents and ran off to quickly learn the required D-ranked jutsu. Then, so as to not make her daughters feel left out, either parents decided to teach each of them a jutsu and teach them more if they mastered the jutsu they had been taught. And so, after learning the 3 rank C jutsu that were replacement jutsu, cloning jutsu, and the fire style ash technique, which in all honesty didn't take that long, about 3 weeks to master them all, she had told her parents and had gotten permission to learn the 5 rank C jutsu. Surprisingly, she had chosen all 5 to be fire techniques because for some reason he found the fire jutsu more appealing and much easier to master than other jutsu of different natures. That's where we find Naruto now after having caught fish and mastered his 3rd rank jutsu that had taken him 2 months to master. He looked at the sun and saw that it was about to. Said, "I better get home before Kazan goes crazy again," he thought, and started back towards the village. As he walked through the streets of Konoha, he couldn't help but feel that something was wrong. He quickened his pace to jogging to get home quickly. When Naruto got home, he still couldn't shake the bad feeling in the pit of his stomach. As he entered the house, he wasn't at all surprised to be tackled to the ground by his sisters. He wondered when and if they would ever stop doing that. "Good night to you too, and Tomi-chan, and Karien," he said as he gently pushed the 2 laughing girls. "Hello, Naruto." He greeted him, and Tomi first, and then Akari followed him. "Hello, Naruto." They took their hands, each took one, and proceeded to dragging them into the dining room where their mother and Shizen were sitting chatting amongst themselves. "Good night, Kak and Nachon." Both women turned their heads, and their faces lit up when they saw the 3 little red-haired boys. "Hello, Naruto-chan. How was your day?" his mother asked after giving him a hug. "It was great. I finally managed to master the dragon fire technique," he said proudly. His mother blinked in surprise before kissing him on the forehead, much to his chagrin and amusement. "Well then, congratulations. How about we go out and celebrate a little? Let's all go eat ramen," Kuzuna suggested happily. Naruto made a face of disgust, and his sisters cheered. And Poi added after seeing their reaction. "Shizen is paying," he added as he walked out of the room with his children held high. He laughed when he heard a small girly scream, "Hey." The next morning, as usual, Naruto woke up from his sleep groaning. As he didn't want to get up, he put on his usual clothes and went downstairs only to find his older sister. Shizen sat at the table watching as her sisters devoured 3 bowls of ramen each in a matter of seconds. Raised an eyebrow. Usually it was their mother who sat with them every morning when they ate. She wondered where he was. A smile spread across his face as he greeted everyone. "Good morning." Everyone looked at him and smiled. "Good morning, Naruto-kun / Naruto-kun." They answered their voices in chorus. "Whereas Kakin?" he asked Shizen. "She had to take care of something and will be back later today," she replied. Shizen and Naruto nodded in understanding. It wasn't like this was the first time this had happened. Their mother would often leave for important meetings or emergencies, and Shizen would look after them. Today was Saturday, and there was no academy today, so Naruto went outside to play on the swings where he knew his sisters would soon join him later that day. To say Naruto was surprised would have been an understatement. The Uchiha clan, one of the founding clans of Konoha, a clan known throughout the elemental nations for their prowess in jutsu, nin/jinin/tai/shuriken, had been annihilated in a single night by one man. Somehow Itachi Uchi had managed to kill his entire clan, including his family, and had managed to escape before anyone realized what he had done. Killing an entire clan in a matter of a few hours at the age of 16 made Naruto shudder how strong and ruthless Itachi was to be able to kill his own family and hundreds of others his head could not assimilate how a single person had managed to do something like that, killing an entire clan in a village filled with Ambu and Honing who watched the village regularly. And yet he had done it. A small amount of guilt began to build up inside him. He had felt something was wrong the day before, but had ignored it. Maybe if he had told someone, they would have checked it out. He didn't scream in his mind. It wasn't his fault. How was he supposed to know something like that would happen? If he was only 8, for God's sake, that was what he told himself, trying to convince himself not to. There was nothing he could have done. He curled up in his bed, listening to his mother's moans through the walls as she mourned the death of her best friend. Maybe he should have done something then. Things could have turned out differently. Time skip for years later. Academy. "Okay, class, calm down," Iruka declared loudly, but no one seemed to have heard him, as everyone was preoccupied with their own conversations. Irritable brats, his voice echoed throughout the class. Everyone fell silent, and Iruka continued, "Thank you. Now, as I was about to say, today is the day that some, and hopefully all of you, will pass and receive the rank of gening." He saw many students looking confident, and most of them showing a lot of excitement. However, before you can be ranked as a genin, you will have to pass the graduation exam. The exam will consist of 3 phases. The first part will be a written O exam, the second will be taijutsu training, and the final part will be a ninjutsu test where you will be asked to practice the 3 ninjutsu that were taught to you here at the academy. The confident looks of some of the students had turned into uncertainty and nervousness. "Yaha, this is going to be a piece of cake, right?" Akamaru said, a brown-haired boy wearing a gray hooded fur coat and a small white dog on his head. The small dog barked in agreement, making the boy smile confidently. "Calm, Kiba. Okay, everyone can begin when I place the questionnaire on your desk." An hour later. "Okay, everyone put down their pencils and line up outside for the second part of the exam." When the students came out, they found Misuki standing inside a circle with a circle drawn on the ground. With his Blanca made a signal to the students to separate into 2 groups, boys and girls. "Okay, so for a pass, you will have to last 3 minutes inside this ring. I will increase my speed as time goes by. The time limit is 10 minutes. Everyone nodded. The first person to go against Misuki was a civilian girl by the name of Ami. "Look at me," Naruto Koen screamed, causing said boy to tremble in fear. He had had many close encounters with that girl. She, with her 2 lackeys, often chased him, wanting to get a date or sometimes a kiss. Fortunately, thanks to his previous training, he was much faster and had more endurance than them, and always managed to escape their clutches. His best friend Shino turned out to be a great buffer for the female fans, as they found him nervous and creepy, and always ran away. They didn't avoid him. They left Naruto alone as long as he was with him. When the match started, Ami seemed to be doing great, but after 3 minutes his stamina ran out, and he lost the match, finishing with a time of 3 minutes and 43 seconds. And I'll just skip the matches and just give you the results. Ami 343, Iruno Sakura 310, Yaman Kaino 356, Yuga Yada 513, Namek 753, Namek House, and Tommy 801. After that, Naruto became distracted with no interest in the other fights. There was a 15-minute break while Misuki regained his energy before it was the boys' turn. Aburame Shino 533, Akimichi Choi 41, Inu Kiba 722, Namikaze Naruto 934, Inner 3. Everyone, including Naruto, sweated well. Students, the final part of the exam will begin in 30 minutes. Make sure you are in class when the bell rings, said Iruka before returning to class and marking the answers for the first part of the exam. Naruto sighed when he saw Ino wink at him. He walked to his usual place, where he was with Shino. After 30 minutes into the lunch break, all the students returned to their classes and waited for the final part of the graduation exam, Shinu Aburame, and so each student was called to do the third academy. As they were nicknamed, surprisingly, all the students passed the exam and proudly wore their new Konoha forehead protector. Congratulations to everyone for passing. Your teams will be announced in a week. See you then. Yuka looked at her class once again, and for a second she saw all the students transform into their 6-year-old youths and 7-year-old children. He blinked and saw that they had returned to their normal 12-year-old forms. Must have been something in my eye, he thought as he walked down the hall, not noticing the single tear that was sliding down his face. A week later, Naruto looked at his sense and was a little surprised not to see Misuki's sense, and with him he blinked as he remembered hearing his parents talk about how someone had tried to break into the low-cage library and steal the scroll of seals, and had been caught by Ambo before he could get in. He snorted inwardly. Only a fool would try to steal something as important as that scroll, and wouldn't think it would be protected. Unfortunately, Misuki won't be with us today. He had a mission to go on, Iruka announced, rubbing the back of his neck nervously. Instantly, everything perked up at the mention of a mission, and Iruka cursed inwardly. What kind of mission, Sensei Sakura, was it that he asked about? A secret mission. Sorry, I can't tell you about it. It's against the law to reveal statements from important missions. He sighed in relief when he saw that all the students believed him While almost all the students Shikamaru was asleep, Shino's face was stoic as always, so he couldn't really say it, and Naruto looked at him with a raised eyebrow clearly, showing that he didn't believe him. Of course, his father is the son of the cage, so he must know the truth. He looked at Naruto's brothers and raised an eyebrow when he saw that they, like the rest of the class, believe his excuse. Although that doesn't explain why me do you think anyway. Now I will announce the team's team. One Naruto stopped listening and instead decided to rest his head on the desk for a bit and stayed. It was Shino who noticed his friend was sleeping and woke up. I think our name should be called. You should pay attention, Shino said after Naruto woke up. Thank you. He muttered under his breath. Team 7, under the leadership of Kakasiak, will be made up of Aruno, Sakura, Namek, and Kasuke Kiba. Team O, under the leadership of Karina, and you will be made up of Yuga, Yurino, YK, and Naruto. The new team is still in circulation, so Team 10 will consist of NAR, Shikamaru, Yaman, Kaino, Yakimi, Choi. Naruto blinked. What about Atomi? Because there is an extra student who was left without a team. He will be an apprentice of one of the Honin and will join other teams regularly. Irika answered his question. Before they could ask him, they all looked at Tommy, who seemed beaten at not being on the same team as any of her brothers or one of her friends. And Tommy, your Honin sensei, will be waiting for you at the training camp 14. As for the rest of you, Sujin and Sense will be here to pick you up in an hour. Good luck, and remember your teamwork. And with that, Yuka left the class. After Irika left, all the new Genins walked out of the class and sat with their new teammates, trying to establish a friendly relationship with each other and get to know each other better. With Team 8, Team 8 sat on the bench where Naruto first met Shino. This had become their usual hangout for sit-down. During the breaks, they sat there in a very awkward silence, as none of the team members were willing to say anything first. Surprisingly, it was Shino who broke the silence. I think the best thing for us would be to introduce ourselves. Why? To get to know each other better and know what our strengths and weaknesses are. The other two members of Team 8 nodded in agreement. My name is Shinu Aburame. I like learning about new insects. Take care of my hive, Naruto-san. I don't like bug killers and people who show prejudice towards my clan members. My dream is to one day become the clan leader and make my clan proud. I specialize in tracking and fighting mid-range. Finished Shino without showing a single outward emotion. He looked at Hinata, and she knew he wanted her to introduce herself. He gulped before speaking nervously. Hello, my name is Yuga, and that I like cinnamon rolls, my family and friends. I don't like people who look down on others and senseless violence. My dream is to one day become a respected kunoichi and reunite with my family. I specialize in tracking, and I'm a short fighter. He finished and bowed his head at the end. Naruto looked at them for a moment and sighed inwardly when he saw Shino staring at him from behind his glasses. He knew what he was about to do. Sighing inwardly again, he spoke. My name is Namikaze. Naruto, I like my family, my friend Shino, to train and Poki. I don't like those who hurt my family, friends, and those who make fun of Poki. My dream is to surpass my father and all the inner. Okay, I specialize in hand-to-hand combat and mid-range. Naruto introduced himself. Last they sat there for a while. The awkward atmosphere dissipated after their introductions. The bell rang and the new team headed to class and met their new sensei inside the classroom. After a minute of waiting, the Honin sensei of each team began to enter and take their genins with them. After the team's Honin sensei left with the door opened, and in walked a young woman with long black hair that reached to her upper back. She had very distinctive red eyes that looked almost like the Sharingan with a ring in them, though without the tomos. She was wearing a red mesh armor top with only the left sleeve visible that resembled bandages with a thorn-like pattern. Her hands and upper thighs were wrapped in bandages. Ultimately, she was a very beautiful woman, and Kiba, who had seen her, had whistled loudly and even drooled at her form. Team 8, come with me, she shouted seriously with a stoic face, and turned around to leave the class, but not before giving Kiba a very cold look as she walked out with Team 8 behind her. Training camp 8, Team 8 stood in front of their new sense, and Honing, who was standing in front of them, looking at them all with a critical eye. He held his gaze for a few more seconds before smiling at them and giving them all a smile of approval. Well, team, now you have introduced yourselves. Everyone opened their eyes, including Naruto. How will I introduce myself? My name is Karina Yui. I like inventing new Jinjutsu techniques and spending time with my friends. I don't like perverts and people who think Jinjutsu is inferior to other techniques. My dream is to one day become a world-renowned Jinjutsu master like Honing. I have many skills, but my specialty is within Jinjutsu. I'm going to tell you now that none of you are genin." He still smiled a little when he saw the young genins almost screaming in. Naruto said in shock, but held back. "You said still, does that mean there's something else we need to do to become a genin?" Naruto asked with his eyes narrowed a little. Karina's smile and grew bigger. "Very good point." She praised him before continuing her speech. "You're right. There is something else you need to do to truly become a genin they don't tell you at the academy. But there is an additional test that each honing gives their genin to determine if they are ready to be a genin or if they should pass another year at the academy. Each test differs from jonin to jonin." "What kind of test are you going to give us, sensei?" asked Hinata nervously. "I'm glad you asked," she said, taking out a wristwatch and placing it on the ground. Everyone looked at her confused. "Your test is to locate me and stop me in 1 hour. If time runs out and you haven't, you will fail and be sent back to the academy," she said seriously. "Your test starts now. Your test starts now." As soon as those words left her mouth, she disappeared in a swirl of leaves. The 3 academy graduates looked at each other without saying a word. "Hinata, can you tell me if you can see her?" asked Naruto. Taking command of Team Yugon shouted. Hinata, the veins around her eyes swelled, and her pointless eyes took on a more defined look. A second later, her eyes widened slightly. Before speaking, "She's hiding inside a tree 100 m north of here. We need to come up with a plan if we were to face her. If we were to leave the academy," Shino explained, and both teammates couldn't help but be in agreement. According to that logic, they stood there in silence once again, each thinking of the best way to approach the situation. "If I can distract her, Shin, you can't drain her chakra with your bugs." And Hinata, "When she hasn't drained her chakra and is disoriented, you can get close to her and finish her off with your gentle fist." It was a good plan, but of course North always worked out on the first try. That was a little surprised when Naruto mentioned what her role would be. Naruto looked at her out of the corner of his eye. "She's nervous." She thought that wasn't good. When people were nervous, they tended to hesitate, and when people hesitated, they put their team in danger. He sighed to himself. Kami hated doing this, and he wasn't good at helping people emotionally. Where are they and Tommy and Carrie when you need them? He complained to himself. His sisters were more open with their emotions than him. And to calm his resolve, he forced a smile. "Don't worry, Yaden. We will pass this test as long as we work together as a team," he said confidently. "You're right. As long as we work together as a team, we will pass," added Shino. And Nada looked at her new teammates, and seeing how confident and supportive her teammates were almost made her want to cry. She looked at them, and with a determined look in her eyes, she nodded her head. She said, trying to sound as confident as she could. "Have you moved?" Naruto asked, seriously refocusing on the point at hand. Hinata activated her Bakugan once more and shook her head. "No, she's still hiding in the same place." They looked at each other once again before jumping into the trees and heading towards her sensei, with Kurenai patiently hid inside a tall oak tree. She knew her students would find her easily, that she was the target. She knew her students would find her easily, that she was the target. She would test her tracking and observe her teamwork skills. If she had them, she felt a strong chakra signal heading towards her and was disappointed since the person was alone. "There is no teamwork," thought a red-haired figure. He landed on the ground a few meters in front of the tree. He is very arrogant to think that he can defeat me on his own, or the other two are hiding somewhere. He narrowed his eyes as he noticed that 2 other chakra furs were hiding nearby. It was probably the latter. After performing some hand seals, he looked at his target and smiled. Demonic illusion, false environment. Naruto landed on the ground where he could sense Arena, and hidden in the tree in front of him. His sensory ability limited him to only 70 met 230 feet. When he first discovered he could sense people, he had tried to develop it further to widen the range, but honestly never succeeded. He was busy trying to master his Sharingan, learning the fire jutsu from the Uchiha clan library. Then the time to learn and properly master his sensory ability never came, hence the limited sensory range. He was a little surprised when the surroundings suddenly changed, and instead of being in front of a tree in a forest, Naruto found himself standing in his elderly parents' house. And it was nighttime, and to top it off, he thought of Kurenai going over some hand seals. Once more, demonic illusion, vision of hell. She whispered and waited to see the results of her jutsu. Naruto found himself lying on the ground with a kunai stuck in his stomach and his sisters crying over his bleeding body. His eyes opened wide in horror. It can't be. The 2 men slowly descended upon their unconscious sisters and very slowly raised their kunai. And in slow motion, they sank their kunai into their sisters' backs. Their eyes opened wide, and slowly the life in them dimmed until they were a dull blue instead of their bright, youthful crystal blue shiver. She let out an inhuman scream, before her eyes rolled back in her head, and she quickly fell to the ground unconscious inside the tree. Kurenai's eyes widened slightly before narrowing in suspicion. That shouldn't have been that easy from what I read. Naruto is the talented one. From her graduating class, should have been able to break free from that Jinjutsu easily. Even more importantly, why she didn't activate her Sharingan. Her suspicions were proven correct when her instincts told her to dodge. She instantly jumped away from the branch she was standing on, and a second later CC Kanai hit the area where she had been hiding. She looked around trying to locate where the attack had come from, and found no one. She looked at Naruto's fallen figure and was shocked when he crumbled into dust and earth. Clone thought surprised and impressed PHSS. That was the only warning she received before the branch. She had moved to avoid the Kuna and exploded from the use of several explosive tags. When the smoke cleared, only a small piece of a trunk could be seen, indicating a replacement. A Urania. Lisa crouched on a new branch, looking towards where the explosion had occurred. That was close, not close enough to see her seriously hurt, but close is good, she thought, looking around trying to locate the young redhead. She could feel several chakra signatures surrounding the area he occupied. Very well, he was using clones to hide his presence and was attacking from multiple angles. She looked towards the sun, calculating that only 27 minutes had passed. There is not much time left. It is time to take this to the next level, she whispered to herself, taking out a kunai from her hiding place. The real Naruto looked at his two teammates. Get ready, it's almost time. Hinata, when you see one opportunity, he attacks. Ignoring the nervous nod she gave him in return, Naruto jumped out of his hiding spot and landed on the ground to get a clear view for an attack. He closed his eyes, and when he opened them, he could see a fully mature Sharingan. He made some hand seals and took a deep breath, fire-style fireball jutsu, and launched a huge fireball that easily went through the forest, reaching the tree where he had since cured. The fireball erupted in a huge fiery explosion that wiped out many of the trees and the surrounding landmass as he felt himself channel a large amount of chakra into his lungs. Sina did what his instincts were screaming at him to do here, and he didn't regret it. As the explosion died down, he was shocked at how much damage the explosion had caused, and to think he's just a genin jumping out of the tree he was on, and now standing a few feet in front of him. He looked at him and was shocked to see him just a little out of breath from all the jutsu he had used so far. His Sharingan was spinning madly before slowing down. Now his slow Sharingan was staring at her as if it was grabbing her. But then again, considering who he is and who his parents are, she shouldn't be that surprised to see that he wasn't going to initiate the attack. Kurenai held her kunai in a reverse grip and was preparing to attack when she suddenly felt her strength draining. Cucked Demo tried to move, but found that she couldn't, so she turned her head forcefully to the side and saw Shino standing there with his arms stretched out, and a horde of insects flew out from the sleeves of her sweater. You are within my division range, she heard a soft whisper and easily recognized it was innate before she could utter a single word. 8 trigrams, 32 palms, 2 palms, 4 palms, 8 palms, 16 palms, 32 palms. She felt her chakra shut down and more of it draining from her. She blinked, too shocked to react. She had completely forgotten about the other two worse, yet she had lost to a group of Henin fresh out of the academy. She an experienced Han and defeated by mere academy graduates. This test was supposed to prove that they also worked as a team, and they were not supposed to be in a position to defeat her. She looked tiredly at Naruto with her forces almost completely exhausted, and he still had his Sharingan active looking at her expectantly. She had underestimated him. She had not underestimated them all. Kami, if Anko found out that she had lost against a group of genin, even new genin would never stop listening to it. A smile spread across her face. Congratulations, you managed to track me down and capture me. You exceeded my expectations, and that's why everyone tensed you. Past point. Okay, that's not the reaction I was looking for. With and Tomi led her in a bad mood towards training camp 14. With a pout on her face, it wasn't fair, she thought, angrily stomping the ground with the CL, because they hadn't placed her with any of the other teams. Better yet, because of all of the students at the academy, she was the one who didn't have a team. She wasn't even in last place in the class, much less. Of course, written exams weren't her strong point, but she was still in 4th place in the class. As she got closer and closer to the training camp where she would meet her future sensei Honing, Tomi's mood became increasingly sour. As she arrived at the training camp, she almost screamed in frustration when she found the training camp empty and no sign of her. Sense and Honing, great, not even my sense Honing is here. She complained loudly. Something hard hit her forehead. She hadn't expected the attack. The object she identified as a rock hit her head, bringing her hands to her now sore forehead. All her previous anger that had calmed down a bit shot up, and just like her mother, it exploded what started, but she froze when she looked at the one who was about to tell her what she thought. Kazan, standing there on top of a tree a few feet away from her, was Kusina Usamaki with her arms crossed and a disapproving look on her face. Instead of her usual clothes she wore every day, her cab was tied in a high ponytail, with locks framing the sides of her face. She also wore a standard Kanoa flak jacket, showing her position as a honing over a short-sleeved black shirt and tight black pants that reached down to her calves. And Tommy Speaks scolded Kusina, jumping off the tree she was standing on and approaching her daughter, who was still frozen, and Tommy, snapping out of his frozen stupor, she pointed an accusing finger at her mother. "You are my Jonin-sensei," she screamed, obviously surprised, but who could blame her? It was not common for a father to teach his own son/s, for obvious reasons. On one hand, the father could avoid taking dangerous missions trying to protect his son. Another reason, which was the most important, was that if his son was put in danger, the father would immediately drop everything and try to save him regardless of whether he was on an important mission. He was protecting a cargo/client important. So it was very, very rare for parents to guide their own children, especially in a hidden village like Kanoa. "Yes, but whenever we are on duty, you call me Kusina-sensei," explained Kusina, ignoring her daughter's cry of surprise. After all, she expected her to react like that. And Tommy just nodded dumbly. His mind was still processing what was happening, regaining some of his composure, and Tommy asked the first question that came to mind. "But you are my K-san," he stuttered. "And now I am Tujin in Sense-Tebane," said Kusina excitedly, unconsciously adding her verbal tick to the end of her sentence. Realizing what she had said, a drop of sweat escaped her, and her breath escaped. Kusina became serious. She looked at her daughter and spoke now. "And Tommy, I'm sure you're wondering why you were the one chosen not to be on a Genin team. Even more important, because I'm your sense Jonin. Seeing him, it would be that there was his mother," and Tommy gulped audibly and nodded his head. "What I'm about to tell you is very important, and not you should tell no one except those people you really trust." Sook now, and Tommy was worried that it might be so important that she couldn't tell anyone but those she trusted. And what did it have to do with her? Something inside her told her that whatever it was, she wasn't going to like it, and her mother's attitude would help confirm it. H answered, and Tommy nervously. Kusina took a deep breath to calm down, and after taking a little moment to check if anyone was listening, no, she found no one, and satisfied that there was no one around, she spoke. "Please don't interrupt me until I'm done, okay?" said Kusina, her voice getting softer, and Tommy didn't answer, taking this as a sign to continue. Kusina started talking. "In the academy, they told you that when the Kyubi attacked the third cage, sacrificed himself, using a Fiden Jutsu to seal it inside the stomach of the god of death, and thus save the village." He paused, and Tommy nodded hesitantly, not understanding what all that had to do with she. Kusina took a deep breath again and continued, "That's not the truth," she gasped, and Tommy was about to continue saying something else, but her mother's look silenced her quickly as she said, "That's not true. It's impossible for a mortal to drag something as powerful as the Kyubi into the stomach of a Shangami. So the third cage did what he could at that moment, sacrificing himself. He sealed the Kyubi in a newborn infant whose chakra paths had not fully formed." He paused and looked directly into Tommy's eyes. "He sealed the Kyubi inside you." Silence, and Tommy froze. His face went blank. No emotion could be seen on his face. The entire training camp went silent. The trees froze, and not even the breath of the wind could be heard. Kusina could swear he heard a leaf fall and hit the ground. The air became very tense. So it was almost suffocating after what seemed like an eternity. Kusina and Tommy finally reacted. "Seal it inside me," he screamed. His breathing became labored, and the tears began to pool in the corners of her eyes. "Why me?" she whispered so slowly Kusina almost didn't hear her, but she did. Taking a step closer, Kusina hugged her daughter, though, and Tommy didn't respond to the hug. His arms just hung at his side. Slowly, his shoulders began to shake. The tears in his eyes began to flow freely down his face. Kusina simply continued to hold her daughter as she continued to cry, not caring that her clothes were getting soaked from the tears. After a few minutes, and Tommy finally calmed down enough for Kusina to talk to her. She had no choice. The Kyubi attacked so suddenly none of us could have prepared for it. So the third did what he could to save the village, explained Kusina, and Tommy, who she was still hugging, had hugged her back at some point. When she was crying, nodded. "What is wrong with the Kyubi? Will it ever break?" At this, Kusina chuckled, and Tommy looked up from his position with curiosity, wondering what he had said that made his mother laugh in a situation like this. "Believe me, the Kyubi is sealed safely and will not escape. Not only is it sealed with the strongest seal ever created, but also both me and your father are few in jutsu, so trust me when I tell you this, the QB will never escape," he said reassuringly. They continued talking with, and Tom, and asking questions about the QB. Kusina answering him, "There is still one thing that I don't understand." Kusina raised an eyebrow. Yeah, what's that? I understand that the Kabai is sealed in me, and all that, but what I don't understand is why are you my honing sensei?" Kusina blinked and almost hit herself in the face. "How could I forget?" She laughed sheepishly, rubbing the back of her neck, embarrassed. He's sorry, I forgot about that. And Tommy's sweat dropped. "Seriously, the reason why I was chosen to be your honing sensei is because I can help you control K's chakra." Item's eyes, and they opened slightly. You can how Kusina swelled the chest with pride and closed his eyes for dramatic effect. A second later, the golden chakra chain sprouted from the ground and hung loose in the air, still connected to the ground, and Tommy could only stay with his mouth open, doing a perfect imitation of a fish with an open mouth. That's so cool," he shouted with stars in his eyes, but then his expression of astonishment turned into one of confusion. "But that still doesn't explain how it will help me control the QB's chakra," smiled Kusina. "These are chains of chakra, only I have access to them, and they are almost indestructible. They can be used for various purposes such as direct combat or physically restraining targets." Even-tailed beasts explained with pride. Tommy's eyes widened slightly, understanding what his mother was saying. With his chakra chains, he could restrain her when and hopefully never lose control. "Go. Then only you can use them," Yami said with a frown. Kusina looked at her daughter's disappointed face with a sympathetic look on her face. Could understand where her daughter was coming from. If the situation was the other way around, she would have been unhappy too, knowing that she couldn't do what her parents could do. "Well, technically, not really. Just because you and your sister and brother haven't been able to use the same chakra chains as me doesn't mean you won't be able to one day," Kusina said, trying to cheer Tommy up. Instantly, Tommy's eyes had a hopeful glint in them. "Now, well, normally I would have to give you an additional test to determine if are you ready to be a genin or not. But since it's just you and no one else, I'll just skip the test," Kusina said hastily to Yomi's delight. "Now, let's go find ourselves a mission. Since you're a Jutsu, a genin will start with ranking missions." He smiled. He couldn't wait to see the expression on his daughter's face when she found out what ranking missions were really about. Tommy's previous happiness was suddenly replaced by nervousness. He felt as if 1,000 souls were screaming at him, warning him of something. "I was coming. I can't wait for you to meet Tora," Kusina said evilly, and Tommy froze. Her mother wasn't going to force her to go on dangerous missions, right? And what Bara, who the hell was Tora, whatever? She was going to kick her ass. She was a Tomi. My case, her mother was one of the strongest women in the world. Her father was the fourth Kage, and her grandparents were two of the three legendary Sannin. Nothing could scare her, especially not this person/thing Tora. Poor and Tommy, if only she knew. Later in the Senja compound, one and Tomi, tired and battered, she entered the Senja compound with an angry snarl on her face that had several claw marks and a swollen blue eye. At the sight, Shizen ran towards her, worried, however, and Tomi simply walked past her, muttering something about evil cat. Shizen looked at Kusina, curious as to what that was about. Kusina chuckled in humor. Tora said simply, walking past Shizen, who blinked before getting a look of understanding on her face that quickly turned into a disappointment. Sympathy. Tora, also known as the Hellcat, was known to almost every Konoha ninja who had the unfortunate luck to meet her. Even Shizen had had her encounter with that rebel cat, and to this day, just the mention of Tora made her cringe. Unconsciously, she brought her hand to her face, rubbing the phantom wounds Tora had inflicted on her long ago when he had tried to catch her. Then, shaking her head in sympathy, Shizen continued what she had been doing before. The next morning, it was early in the morning. The sun rays were just barely passing over the mountain. The dew on the leaves and grass was still visible, and Team 7 was impatiently waiting for their sensei to arrive. "Honing, where the hell is this guy?" yelled Kiba, stomping the ground in frustration for the 100th time. "Kiba, you know it," yelled Sakura. "No, he only arrived hours late yesterday and gave us a lame excuse as to why he was late. He also told us to be here at 5:00. Still no. Looks like what kind of honing does that do, man? Now I wish he was on the same team with Naruto and Shino. At least his honing came on time. Not only that, but he is very, and I mean very sexy." He finished his speech with a drool at the end, only to get punched in the face courtesy of a furious and angry perverted. Sakura screamed in female rage, causing Kiba to fly off and crash into a tree. Surprisingly, a second later, he was standing and facing Sakura. "What the hell, crazy bitch, that hurts faster than he could blink." A fist hit him on the top of the head and sent him crashing into the hard, unforgiving ground. "Call me?" Sakura asked in a somber tone, putting extra emphasis on each word. Her head bowed, and her hair covering her face. Kiba, who was now lying on the ground, didn't see and muttered an answer that sealed his fate. Peppa the bitch exploded. Sakura began to punch the still fallen Kiba into the ground until half of his body was buried in the ground and his legs rose into the air. The only sign that he was still alive was the constant movement of his legs. Shaking off the dust, Sakura snorted and turned around to see a groaning Akamaru who, upon seeing her staring at him, ran off as fast as his little legs could carry him. Sakura smiled and walked over to the other woman on her team, and her smile turned into a frown when she saw Ariyari hadn't been paying attention to any of her teammates since arriving at the training camp. Her mind was on worried about something else, more specifically what their parents had told them about, and Tomi the night before had been a surprise to her and her brother when they found out that and Tomi was none other than a Jinsha of the QB ad. First, she had been afraid that sooner or later the QB would break free and kill them all. However, her father had quickly intervened and calmed her fears by explaining to them that the seal was safe and that the chances of the QB breaking free were impossible. After that, the three children had spent some time talking to each other, mainly her and Akari, before going to bed. But Akari didn't sleep. Something kept her up most of the night, as stupid and ridiculous as it might sound. And Carrie was jealous, not for not being the one who sealed the QB inside her mind, no. And Carrie was jealous because, unlike Naruto and Tommy, she didn't receive some kind of power bar curse at birth, as silly as it may seem. She felt left out when she was told that Naruto had been injected with Madara's adyas. Sarama felt sorry for her brother, and that was it now. However, her mana also had the QB sealed inside of her, and that changed everything. Now she felt like she was the only male out of the group. Yari. How was her smart reply? She saw the worried look on her friend's face and wondered how long she had been thinking. I've been calling you for over a minute. Are you okay? Sakura asked worriedly, her personality in direct contrast to what it had been a few minutes ago. Oh yeah, I'm fine. I just have something on mind. That's all, Akari said. Without thinking, Sakura looked at her friend with narrowed eyes. Before frowning, oh yes, you're sure? Yari just nodded her head. So how long do you think he'll make us wait? The sensei asked Sakura, changing the subject. Yari frowned a little and sighed loudly and slapped her forehead with her hand. How could I forget? Kakashi is always late for everything. Kazan, he always complains that he's always late for everything. So how long is he usually late? Sakura asked. No, it could be that bad, right? 3 hours, Yari moaned. We could get comfortable, said Sakura in a defeated tone, walking towards a nearby tree and collapsing with Akari right behind her. 2 hours later. Hey, sorry I'm late. A black cat crossed my path, and I had to take the long way around, said Kakashi, appearing in a burst of smoke with a smile in his eyes. Hearing nothing, he opened his only uncovered eye with curiosity, and sweat dripped at what he saw. Akari and Sakura were sleeping under a tree, and Kiba had to look twice at that. Kiba's upper body was buried in the ground, and his dog Akamaru was trying unsuccessfully to dig it out. What an interesting team. Closing exclamation. The target is in my sight, said a voice on the radio. Wait for the others to get into attack position, replied a female voice. They fell silent before another voice spoke over the radio. I can see the target. A few seconds, and another voice spoke. I'm in range. Okay. Then Team Oo, go ahead. Instantly sounds of fighting were heard. Ruin. There was some movement before everything went silent. Report target captured. An annoyed voice answered over the radio. 3 figures came out from the bushes, all with some scratch marks somewhere on their bodies. Karina nodded and looked away from her team, hiding the small laugh that was about to escape her lips. The team entered the cashier's office with a fighting Tora being held tightly by a very annoyed who looked almost ready to kill the struggling cat at any moment. Team Oo reports for a successful mission, Okajima, said Karina, tilting her head slightly and receiving a smile from the cage, who nodded. A woman who had been sitting in a chair in the office suddenly stood up from her seat, and with speeds that a normal civilian should not possess, she ripped the now trembling Tora off of Naruto and began squeezing him with her hug. Now, I understand why he was struggling so much. Stay away, poor kitty. I won't let him take any of you. Oh, my poor Tora, I was so worried. Never run away from Mom again, said the woman while she floated the poor cat's face. Ignoring the scene in front of him, the Okage addressed the team. Congratulations, team. Oh, you will take more missions. Karina and looked at her team. They had already finished training for today and needed to rest a little. Catching Tora had not been easy. No, Okage-sama, that will be all. The Okage Naruto nodded, and the team O proceeded to leave the office. Okay, Team Oo, that will be all for today, said Karina. As they walked down the hall, everyone nodded, and as they exited the building, they were about to go their separate ways. When Shino spoke up, Naruto yelled Shino. As Naruto was about to leave, Naruto stopped and looked at his teammates who were still standing at the exit door, and, raising an eyebrow, he turned around and walked towards them. Yes, Naruto replied. When he was near them, Hinata looked nervous and hesitated before speaking. We're going to eat at a restaurant, and we wanted to ask you if you would go with us. She blushed at the end and looked down to hide her blushing face. For a few minutes, Naruto remained silent. He looked at his companions. A part of him wanted to leave, but another part reminded him that he had some training to do today. He was close to mastering that new fire jutsu. Maybe he could go out with them next time. I'm sorry, I can't. There's something I need to do today, said Naruto with a smile. He sighed, earning a frown from his teammates at another time. Then he said, Shino, with a hint of hope in his voice. He had been waiting for his best friend to come with him lately. He had been seeing him less, and less. This was his chance to spend some time with him. Yes, at another time, Naruto said, and walked away from his disappointed teammates. The three of them didn't notice an invisible figure hiding behind a genjutsu watching them. Karina and frowned as Naruto looked at his team. He didn't. She was joining, as she expected. XXXX. Naruto walked towards the empty training field that he always used to receive private training. The training field was near the Uchiha clan compound. It was a small clearing surrounded by several trees. At the end of the clearing was a lake. He closed his eyes only to open them a second later. Although this time with his Sharingan activated, he walked towards the center of the clearing. He closed his eyes once again, this time in concentration, taking a few breaths to calm himself. He now screamed in his mind at speeds that would leave some Honioks. Opened his eyes, opened his hands, flashing through hand seals in a blur. Fire, released Hellfire Clap. At first it seemed like the jutsu had gone wrong, but then the temperature in the area began to rise, and a circle composed of pure fire formed on the ground surrounding Naruto, before rising up to completely cover him. With a final clap, the wave of destructive fire spread out in a circle, embracing everything it entered upon contact with him. The fire spread about 9 meters around Naruto before dying out in the center, where the fire came from. Naruto stood there and watched with a slight gasp at the destruction caused by his jutsu. The small green clearing that was once beautiful was now covered in black scorch marks and ashes from burnt grass and some bushes. 9 met. Naruto thought with a slight frown. The jutsu he had just done was a rank A chakra consuming defensive jutsu. At least that he had read. The diameter of the jutsu was 15 m from the caster. So far the best he had been able to achieve was 7 m new. Counting today. Now one might wonder how and why Naruto knew a rank A jutsu. The reason was simple really. When his parents had told him the limit of jutsu he was allowed to learn, Naruto had made sure to copy as many jutsu as he could. It wasn't to spite his parents or anything. No, the reason he had done it was because he had reasoned to himself that he might one day come in an hour when he would need to be able to cast one of those jutsu, either to protect himself or his family. Call it paranoia. But after that day, when they almost got killed, he wasn't going to take any chances. Thanks CI for the photographic memory of the Sharingan. Otherwise, he would have never been able to remember any of those jutsu. He was thankful that he had been copying those jutsu, because if he hadn't, he would never have been able to do it. After the Uchiha clan was massacred, the whole place had been sealed off, and no one had allowed to enter the compound. All those jutsu and information were lost. He thought sadly after mastering the jutsu he had chosen to learn when his parents had given him the opportunity to learn only a select amount of jutsu. Naruto had decided to experiment, or so to speak, with the other jutsu he had copied. It had started out more as an act of curiosity from a small child wanting to see how far he could go with what he knew, which soon turned into him wanting to master everything he knew, not just to make his dream come true, but also to protect himself, and most importantly to protect his family. Of course, his parents didn't know what he was doing, so he had trained those jutsu in secret and prayed to CI that they would never find out, especially his mother. There were very, and I mean very few things that scared Naruto, and those things were ghosts if he ever stopped Poki, but mostly an angry cues and a clap clap. I must say, Nook, and I'm impressed, said a voice to a few feet behind him, a voice he instantly recognized very well. Naruto froze, his legs began to shake slightly, sweat was running down his forehead. It can't be Cammy, that's not her, that's anyone but her, he prayed, and with much reluctance he slowly turned his head, and what he saw made him groan. Standing there with a sweet devilish smile on her face was none other than his mother. He turned away from her. His heart was beating so fast and so loud he could even hear it. So Nookin, would you mind telling me, what was that? Naruto gulped audibly. Cammy must really hate me. Kazan groaned. How funny seeing you here. What can I do for you? He laughed nervously as he rubbed the back of his neck. Kuzuna laughed and sighed. He loved seeing his son get out of his usual seriousness and act like a normal kid. That's why he made sure to get angry as often as he could. He had his expression serious wanting to see how long it would take him. Before he broke down not long what was that he asked again, pointing at the charred ground and adding a bit of K to make him sweat. Even more, Naruto wanted to scream from frustration of all the people who caught him, because why couldn't it be your father, her sisters, her grandmother, anyone, but her? How had she found him anyway? She had made sure to find the most private training camp around. She was sure that no one but some Ambu and some members of the Yukia clan knew about this training camp. How had she gotten so close to him without him noticing? Her detection range wasn't that wide, but it was wide enough that to notice when people were around. While she is a honing in a S-rank Kenichi. She answered her own question. Naruto calmed down enough to face her and readied himself and spoke a jutsu. He said, testing the waters. I can see that. What kind of jutsu? Sukiyai increased slightly. A fire jutsu. A check mark appeared on Kuzuna's forehead. What kind of fire jutsu? A rank jutsu, Naruto admitted, finally preparing himself for what he knew would be the scolding of his life. Imagine his surprise when, instead of yell at him or punch his mother in the head, she moved in front of him and gave him the biggest hug she'd ever given him. Kyuk, stuttered Naruto, shocked. After she let go of him, you've mastered a rank. A jutsu, you fool, laughed. Not even I could do that when I was your age. Oh, this calls for a celebration. Let me treat you to as many sharp sticks as you want. Naruto's mind that had shut down from shock finally reset. Enough for him to speak. But you're not mad. I shouldn't be angry. Basically, he had gone behind her back and did what he had been told, not to learn more jutsu, of course. Now why should she be angry when my little son just did something as amazing as this? He waved his hand, indicating the damage caused by the fire. I went behind your back, he said without any expression. Well, we knew you would learn other jutsus. So technically you did nothing wrong. You knew that you had access to an entire library full of powerful ninjutsu techniques. We would be stupid if we thought you wouldn't try to learn more. But why didn't you stop me? Kuzuna smiled. We wanted you to learn how to gain your own strength without anyone stopping you. And we were hoping you could tell us on your own. Naruto shuddered at that. He had never thought of telling them or anyone. His eyes widened slightly in realization. He had wasted a lot of time wondering whether or not he should go ahead and try to master some of the other jutsu he had seen without his parents' concert, and even after having decided to do so, he had held back and had only practiced a few jutsu, just in case he had gotten caught. Then he would simply say that all he managed to learn were a few jutsu, and none of them were too dangerous. His punishment would surely have been less severe aside from the original amount of jutsu he was supposed to learn. He had only learned a total of 7 jutsu: 2D rank jutsu, 3C rank jutsu, 1B rank jutsu, 1A rank in total, that brought him to a total of 5D rank jutsu, 8C rank jutsu, 2 of rank B, and now 1 of rank A. Rank equal replacement jutsu: clone jutsu, fire style ash technique, water clone jutsu, earth style earth clone jutsu. C rank equal mythical fire phoenix hutsu, fire style dragon fire style aerial explosion, fire style fire bed, water style evil windmill, water shuriken, water style water chain jutsu, earth style mud river, earth style earth dragon explosion. B rank equal fire style great fire dragon, fire style hellfire whirlwind, ranking equal to fire style hellfire clap. After mentally checking the number of jutsus he knew, he smiled proudly. After many burns on his clothes, throat, mouth, and chest, he could proudly say that he knew many fire jutsus, some water and earth jutsus. But that didn't matter. He had tried to do some wind and lightning jutsus. Not only had it been very difficult for him, but they had taken away a lot of chakra. After countless attempts and neither of the two successes, he had given up and had moved on to other things. The earth and water jutsus were, and still are, slightly difficult and required at least twice the chakra required for a fire jutsu, but with his large chakra reserves and very good chakra control, they didn't put enough of a dent in his progress as to deter him from learning them fire jutsu. He had to smile at that. The fire jutsu were by far where he really shined from. At first, he had been drawn to the fire element, and he could honestly say that he loved them. Sure, he had hurt himself trying to learn them, but hey, who said power came at a price? Free. As they say, no pain, no gain. Another thing he loved about fire jutsu was because it didn't drain much of his chakra. In fact, he almost never noticed the chakra drain when using rank fire ninjutsu. That was also the reason he had learned so many fire jutsu. They were just too good for him. Let them pass. Looking at his mother, Naruto wanted to test something that had been bothering him ever since he had started training. How strong he was. He wanted to test himself against someone powerful to see if he was making any progress in achieving his dream of surpassing all the Okage, to see if all his hard work was paying off. This was his chance. His mother was a very powerful person. He wasn't arrogant enough to believe that he could actually defeat her or land a blow on her, but he knew that if there was someone she could test, And that was her. She would have asked other people like her father, grandfather, or grandmother. However, all of them had their own disadvantages. Her father was a very busy person and spent most of his time at work. Her grandmother, just like her father, spent most of her time in the hospital, and from the way she treated him, he doubted she would really hurt him. Her grandfather was always out of the village, rarely visiting him. So that was another dead end too. There was Kakashi, who often came to the house to talk to his father, or sometimes to play with him and his sisters, but the guy was so lazy and don't even talk to him. About his cuteness for being late, the only person left was his mother. She was strong. She definitely wouldn't hold back with him. She was always around, so the choice was obvious. Kusina looked at him. Would you fight me? Suddenly a smile spread across her face. She had been waiting for him to ask her sooner or later. Both and Tomi and Carrie had already done that. He had been asked to fight them separately and give them advice and tell them exactly how strong they were from their fight. He had deduced that both girls were at most in the middle level of chunning, bordering on the high level of chunning. That was the reason he had come to his son's private training camp, to test him. Also, luckily, it was he who asked her, "Is it okay, Narek-kun? I want you to come at me with everything you have. Don't hold back on anything." He jumped to create some distance between them with a Kun already drowned. Don't worry, he wasn't planning on doing that, Naruto thought, with his Sharingan already active, slowly spinning in preparation for battle. Lokage office. At the same time, Minato looked at the crystal ball on his table with great attention. He was not alone. Around him were Tsunade, Kakashi, Shizuna, and Kurenai. When Kusina had told him she was going to test the children, he had made sure to watch all the matches in the crystal ball. Tsunade, who had happened to overhear the conversation, had made sure not to miss the fights. He had also invited Shizen, who had happily come along. He had told Kakashi that they were basically Karina family. She had just been invited to watch the mother and son match, because after all, she was Naruto's sense and honing, and the better she understood her team's abilities, the better she could determine how to best implement them in their missions and teamwork. This should be interesting, said Kakashi as he put his book in his pocket. What it really surprised everyone in the room. Although no one made any comment about it, everyone remained silent as they stared at the crystal ball, breaking the silence. How long do you think it will last? Tsunade suddenly asked. Minato thought about it for a few seconds, and Tommy had lasted 13 minutes, and Carrie had lasted 14 minutes. So Naruto would last at least 17 to 18 minutes. Without looking away from the crystal ball, he answered her. 171 minutes or so. She nodded slightly. Kurenai, that she had been listening to their conversation. She couldn't help but wonder why they had had so much time for the test. Surely Kusina wasn't going to fight a genin at full strength. No. As she phrased her question, Kusina-sama asked, "He won't seriously fight him, right?" Everyone turned their heads towards her. She couldn't help but blush at the sudden attention. "We'll let you see for yourself," Kakashi replied mysteriously. She was about to ask what he meant by that, but was interrupted by the voice of Ikato. They're starting back to the clearing. Kusina was the first to move in a display of impressive speed. She disappeared from her position. Naruto only had a second to dodge a fist that appeared right where his face had been. His Sharingan had picked up on his movements and warned him about the blow. Sensing another attack, he raised both hands just in time to block a kick to the head. Unfortunately for him, he hadn't anticipated the force of the kick that made him slip a few meters. When he stopped, he almost screamed from the pain in his arms. "She is strong. I can't match her in speed or strength. Maybe fire-style dragon fire jutsu." A stream of fire came out of his mouth. Unlike the other times, he had turned it into a dragon head. This time the fire came out of his mouth like a Marcos caster. He had the jutsu for a few more seconds before stopping. When the smoke cleared, a body burned and charred could be seen lying on the ground with his Sharingan. Naruto could see that the person that was lying on the ground was actually her mother, but something about it felt wrong. She was about to throw a kunai at the body when suddenly it exploded in smoke. Her eyes widened. A clone? What kind of clone was that? She bit her lip to keep from screaming when a fist sank into her stomach. Kusina smiled, but that smile turned into a frown when she saw that the Naruto she had hit was smiling at her with zone. She had no time to react when the Naruto suddenly exploded. Explosive tags. She pointed before disappearing in a burst of smoke. "I must say, Nukin, I'm impressed you managed to fight me at honing level. How about we fine-tune this a little more?" Grit to Kusina, looking directly at her son, who was hiding in a tree. Multiple shuriken suddenly appeared, heading straight towards her, but to her surprise, none of them were on target. She looked curiously, wondering what he was up to. Her eyes caught a silver flash following the shuriken. So that's her plan. In mid-air, the shurikens turned around, and all of them spun around her. She was tied with ropes that wrapped around her and bound her entire body. Naruto appeared in front of her with his hand, making Earth-style hand seals. River of mud. He pressed his hands into the ground, and soon it began to turn liquid and turned into mud. The attack continued until the ground beneath her also turned into mud and sank her into the ground up to her chest. Naruto gathered more chakra in his lungs and performed another set of hand seals and exhaled a powerful sigh of fire-style bed of fire. He threw an oily substance that spread over the river of mud until it covered the entire surface. As soon as the area was covered, Naruto willed the oily substance to ignite. The effect was immediate. It resulted in a carpet of flames that spread across where the oil was. When the fire dissipated, what was left was the ground, now solid and hard. In the middle was an empty hole the size of a body. Naruto gasped. He was getting tired. If things continued like this, he wouldn't last any longer. Ugh, that would have hurt, he said. Kuzuna appearing on top of a tree, her clothes were slightly burnt, and a small part of her skin was slightly charged. Time to try a different approach. Kuzuna was about to attack when her surroundings began to change Jinjutsu. She thought, and brought her hands to gather her chakra kai. The illusion was easily dispelled. Kuzuna attacked. Disappearing in a blur, she appeared in front of Naruto. She raised her fist and released it. She was surprised when her fist pierced Naruto. What she thought surprised, she attacked again, and was surprised when the same result occurred. She looked at Naruto and saw that he was looking directly at her with his Sharingan active. She almost hit her head with the palm of her hand. Of course, you never look a SH user directly in the eyes. She hadn't anticipated that he would have gone this far with his Sharingan. She gathered her chakra once more, and in an explosion broke the Jinjutsu. As the illusion dissipated, what she saw surprised her. There was Naruto with his back hunched back and a large amount of chakra building up in his chest. Great Hutsu fire style of dragon fire. 5 large dragon heads, easily twice the size of a normal fire dragon, launched themselves at her at high speed. Upon contact, a fiery explosion like no other shook the training grounds. The shockwaves from the explosion sent Naruto flying into the trees. When the explosion died down, a large crater was formed. Several trees were swept away and a few burned until only branches and stumps remained. Naruto staggered as he stood up. He used almost all of his chakra in attack. His Sharingan was slowly spinning until it stopped, and his eyes returned to their usual dark blue hue. He looked at the center of the attack, but couldn't see it clearly as it was obscured by dust and smoke. The dust slowly settled, and behind him was a cocoon of golden chains. The chains began to recede towards the ground, and he could clearly see his mother. She was not hurt aside from the previous burn marks, and her clothes were slightly charred. There were no new wounds on his body. She gave him a satisfied smile before disappearing, only to appear a second later in front of him with her knee buried in his stomach. He leaned forward in agonizing pain. Before he could recover, she disappeared again and kicked him in the chest, sending him flying through the air. He blinked as a red blur passed by him. He didn't see anything, but something resembling a very large metal bar hit him in the back, sending him straight to the ground. As he crashed into the ground, a small crater where he had hit, his vision blurred, and the last thing he saw was a red blur that picked him up before the world went black. Kuzuna looked at her son with a proud look on her face. He had done exceptionally well. She honestly didn't expect him to be this good, and to think that he had even pushed her enough to use her chakra chains. Even though she hadn't been going all out, she was still impressed by how strong and how well he had used his jutsu and set. She picked him up from the small crater and carried him bridal style and disappeared into a shunin of leaves office of it. Everyone in the room was silent with different expressions on their faces. Minato had a surprised and proud look. Kakashi's I was slightly open. Shizen, I didn't expect it to be so strong. Shizen muttered quietly, but everyone heard her, and they couldn't help but agree. How strong would you say it is? Karina asked, and still shocked by what had seen. High-level chunning, almost low-level honing, answered Minato proudly. He knew his son was strong from the very day they began teaching them. Naruto had shown prodigious skills in everything he did. He had been worried when Naruto had told them what he had found in the Uchiha clan library. He had been worried that his son would become power-hungry and eventually follow in the footsteps of his predecessor Madara. That was why they had set a limit for the number that he was allowed to learn, although as the prodigy that he was, Naruto had quickly mastered the set of jutsu he had chosen. At times, he had wondered if he should learn more or not. When learning more, Minato had wanted to stop him, but Kuzuna had stopped him before he could, stating that they shouldn't try to hinder his son's growth, that they shouldn't decide for him what to learn and what not in the end, he had given up although he controlled his son, using the crystal ball 2 months later. 2 months had passed ever. Since Naruto had faced his mother once he woke up in the hospital from the beating she had given him, he remembered the end of their battle. He went straight to her to ask her how strong she thought he was. He couldn't help the proud smile that spread across his usually stoic face when he heard what she had to say about him. It was like a small weight had been lifted off his shoulders. He was strong, and he was getting stronger. All those hours spent training had paid off, and they continued paying off immensely after that. He had thrown himself more and more into his training. He still felt like the gap between how strong he was and how strong he wanted to be was too big, infinitely big. During his time with Team 8, they would spend 2 hours working on their teamwork, then Karina, and have them work on some obstacles, and have them do some laps around the training ground. Finally, have them work on their chakra control after, or work with each of them individually, and then they would accept a single mission. After the mission, he would let them go home, or in Naruto's case, go train some more. That had been his team's routine for the past 2 months. So when they got to the cashier's office, everyone was surprised when instead of requesting a normal rank mission from Karina, she did something different. I would like to request an Okage-sama rank mission. Everyone, even the Okage, was surprised. Ah. Yes, are you sure? Asked the Okage. After all, Karina, only he had had his gening team for 2 months. Most Honi didn't accept missions above rank D until it had been at least 7 months since they had become true Henin. Karina looked at her team and nodded. I think my team is ready for a Kokai-sama rank mission. Minato looked at the mission request on his desk. His eyes lit up slightly as he found a perfect mission for them. Here's a rank mission. He took a file and handed it to Karina. Your mission is to deliver an important scroll to a Sandin who will be waiting for you at the border between Konoha and Suna. Do you accept this mission? Karina and looked at the mission details before nodding his head. Hello, Okage-sama, he said, bowing his head slightly before turning to his team. Go and pack your bags for a 2-day trip. Make sure to bring only the essentials and meet you at the door in an hour. The Genin nodded and left the office. Naruto, shouted Minato to his son, who was already at the door. Tusen, replied Naruto, and turned to look at his father. Be careful out there, okay? And good luck. I will. Thanks. I was about to leave before Minato spoke again. Don't forget to tell your mother and grandmother where you're going. They'd feel bad if you don't. Naruto froze, and a small shiver ran down his spine. He wasn't looking forward to it. Minato watched with a proud smile as his son left for his first rank mission. He looked at a picture he had on his desk. It was a picture of him carrying 3-year-old Naruto on his neck. He was wearing his usual Okage robes, and Naruto was wearing orange pajamas with green toads on them. They grow so fast, he thought as he went back to focusing on his paperwork. XX Naruto walked towards the door and wasn't surprised to find everyone else waiting for him. Sorry, I'm late, he said without giving them a reason as to why he was late. He had dinner and raised an eyebrow and looked at him with a questioning expression. Where's your backpack? He asked, seeing that the only thing Naruto had on him other than his usual clothes, it was a bag of kunai. Naruto raised his hand slightly and moved his shirt slightly to show his arm. What caught everyone's attention was the seal that was written on his hand. He added a bit of chakra to the seal, and a puff of smoke appeared. When the smoke cleared, his small backpack could be seen on the ground. I keep all my things sealed inside me. It's much easier and more comfortable this way, he explained, showing another seal on his hand. How it works? Asked Shino curiously. The seal creates a dimension pocket where everything is stored. I seal by adding a minuscule amount of chakra to the seal. The elements come out of the seal. His parents were seal experts, so he learned a few things from them. However, he wasn't as interested in seals as they were. That was more Akari's strong point than his own. Karina gave Naruto an encouraging smile. Her student was proving to be more amazing as time went on. Can you do the same for me? Shino asked, seeing the benefits of having his items sealed. Not only would it provide him with less weight to carry, which could potentially and possibly fatally slow him down, but the likelihood of his items getting lost or stolen was reduced to almost nothing. Naruto nodded, happy to help his best friend slash teammate. He channeled chakra into the seal on his wrist, and a scroll appeared. He opened the scroll, and another seal could be seen written on it. After channeling chakra into the seal, some tools appeared of writing. Where do you want me to place the seal? Asked Naruto, dipping the brush into a bottle of ink. Shino rolled up the sleeve of his right coat. There is a limit to the amount of things you can seal. You will know the seal is full when you try to add more things, and nothing happens. He added, lastly, how can I seal my things there? He asked Shino. Place the things you want on the ground, concentrate a small amount of chakra on the seal, and the rest will take care of itself. He undid them. Naruto, nervously, she wanted to ask him to do the same thing he did for Shino, but she was too afraid to ask, and if he said no, Naruto and Shino had been friends for a long time, she had hardly ever talked to him. Even though they were teammates, Naruto was a very quiet and distant person. In the 2 months they had been teammates, he had only gone out with them twice, even then it had been dinner, and who had convinced him to go with them with the argument that it would help strengthen his teamwork. She barely said anything that time, and if Shino hadn't been there, it would have been very awkward. The truth is she had no idea where she stood with him. Sure, she was her sister's best friend, and they were teammates, but that was all Sina, and brought her out of her thoughts by grabbing her shoulder. She looked up confused and saw Karina, and looking at her, as if to say go ahead, she nodded slightly and gathered her courage. Hinata gulped slightly. Naruto, "Sen, could you do the same for me?" Mai finished looking at the ground, and steepling his fingers, Naruto looked at her with a raised eyebrow. Why is she so nervous? He mused internally, and shrugging, he dipped the brush into the inkwell and walked over to her. "Where do you want me to put it?" And Nada blushed and rolled up her sleeve to show her pale, white left hand. Nodding, he held her hand in his and began to lower it. He didn't notice that Nada's blush intensified 10 times with the contact, and if she did, she didn't show it when she saw that Naruto had finished Kurenai. He took command. "Okay, team, let's move. Naruto, you take command. Shino and Hinata walk a few steps behind him. And remember, even if it's only a C-rank mission, anything can happen, so be alert." Pei shouted 3 voices at once. And with that, Team 8 embarked on their first C-rank mission, a mission that would change their lives. XXXXX 5 hours later, Team Kurenai walked silently down the dirt road that headed to the border between SUA and Konoha. Kurenai, who was walking behind her team, noticed that everything was going. They were getting tired and looked exhausted. And that was the worst of all. He was sweating. His walking speed had visibly slowed down, but he was forcing himself to walk. Shino was next. He didn't physically show he was tired, but her trained eyes could easily pick up the little details in him that put her on notice. There was sweat glistening on his skin, and the big coat he was wearing wasn't helping at all. His feet pushed lightly down the path, and apart from that, nothing else was seen. However, Naruto didn't. He showed no signs of fatigue. His pace had slowed slightly, yes, but nothing else indicated that he was tired. Probably because of his Uzumaki heritage, Kurenai thought to herself, "Let's stop here and take a 30-minute break." Kurenai said. Everyone immediately stopped walking, immensely relieved. "Can you tell me if there's anyone near our position yet?" Nodded her head. Bakugan Bay. "There's no one around." Since Karina nodded and motioned for her team to follow her, they followed her until they came to an open area. "Rest, I'll go explore later." Saying this, he disappeared between the trees, leaving the team alone. Naruto looked at where his sensei had just disappeared with a raised eyebrow. He hadn't gone to Nada to check if there were people just now. Maybe he had something else to do, he thought to himself. He rolled up the sleeve of his jersey and, adding chakra to the seal on his hand, he revealed the only thing he had been craving since he left the village. Poi, finding a place to sit. Naruto did exactly that, and he enjoyed the food. The Sai gave him, "What's Poki? Do you mind if I join you?" He looked up from where he was sitting and saw Shino holding a box of Vento. He patted the spot next to him, motioning for Shino to sit in front of it. Naruto looked at Hinata and saw her sitting a few feet away alone. Hinata called out to her. She raised her head so fast he was surprised it didn't fly off his neck. "Come sit with us." He waved his hand, indicating a spot next to him, and Shino had thanks. Naruto let him. She waved her hand. "Don't mention it, we're teammates." After all, her cheeks reddened, and the ground suddenly became interesting. 30 minutes later, Kurenai arrived at the small clearing and found her Jin and team sitting together on the ground talking, which surprised her. She coughed lightly to get their attention. "It's time to go." They all nodded their heads. They had already packed everything after finishing their meals. XXX next day, location border between Konoha and Sunakarina had already taken the forward. As the team continued their mission, they could see the desert half a kilometer 500 m from where they were. "You stay here while I go meet up with his non-ninjas." Naruto, "I leave you in charge, and not to keep your Bakugan active and look for any sign of trouble." Seeing that everyone understood their positions on what to do, Kurenai continued walking towards the desert, where she knew the non-ninjas would be waiting for her team, who watched as her sense walked towards the desert. They saw her stop right in the area where the desert and forest separated. She waited for a few minutes too before a man appeared in the distance walking towards her, and because of the distance between them, they couldn't see the man's face or what he was wearing. Kurenai and the man spoke to each other before Kurenai reached into her bag and pulled out what looked like a scroll and handed it to the man. The two exchanged a few more words before the man walked away, and Kurenai walked back towards them. After a while, he ate dinner and returned to where her team had been waiting for her with a smile on their face. "Mission completed. Let's go home." Everyone seemed disappointed by that, even Hinata. That was all everyone thought. Naruto knew about missions and how they were ranked. He also knew that the probability of running into dangerous dangers in a C rank was very small. But in all honesty, He had been hoping that they would run into some gangs, or even missing means he couldn't help but feel disheartened as they spent the whole day walking only for the mission to end so easily without him knowing it. His teammates were also thinking the same thing, Karina, and she saw the looks of disappointment on her Jenin's faces and smiled amused. She knew why everyone was disappointed after all. She had been in the same situation too, when her sensei had told them they were going on a C-rank mission. She, like any other naive genin, thought they would fight bandits / neens missing, and even save countries and princesses. Imagine her disappointment when she found out the mission was to protect a merchant heading to a village a few miles from Konoha. The team continued walking for 4 miles. By then the sun was high in the sky, making their journey that much more difficult. As the team walked, Karina and Ishikawa walked behind them, with Shino Yada walking a few steps in front of her side by side, and Naruto taking the lead. Karina had ordered Inada to constantly activate Sugan at intervals random to check for any signs of trouble mid-step. Inada froze, drawing Karina's attention. Yino is sensei. There are some people ahead of us, all left. Deem, how many do you see? 8 of them. 5 are hiding, and the other 3 are waiting in the Kakar. Red Era said, Hinata shaking slightly. Dinner and cursed silently. Can you tell me their ranking? All members of the Yuga clan were taught to identify a person's strength bar rank by the amount of chakra that he possessed, although this was not always correct because in some cases sometimes a Honin could have a small amount of chakra. This was because they specialized in something like Kinjutsu or Jinjutsu, and some Genin could have more chakra than a Chunin or Jonin 2, Jonin 3, Chunin, and 3G. Genin replied in Nada. Karina and cursed again. They could not surround them, because judging by the way they were waiting for them, they had already seen them coming. The situation was not good. They were outnumbered, and their enemies had more power of fire that the only way they had any hope of surviving this was for her to cast a Jinjutsu strong enough to hold them off long enough for Shino to drain their chakra, and for Naruto to finish them off with one of his fire ninjutsu. With her plan in mind, Karina looked at her team. They would survive this. She promised herself they would all XXXXXX. End of chapter. In the next chapter, Naruto realizes he can use Mokuton, so stay tuned, read, and review please. Oh, and please check out my new story, The Namikaze. Goodbye team. Oh, continued walking in a straight line, acting as normal as possible. They continued walking until they were stopped by the 2 men who were standing in the middle of the street. Karina had moved to walk slightly ahead of her team. Can I help you? Karina asked, looking directly at the 2 men. Both were wearing headbands cut from Kyumo and Gon. Karina thought to herself, of course you can. How about you and that little princess from there? You are not still, and maybe we should think about letting the other 2 go alive. One of the men looked at Karina with a look. She looked at him, taking in all the details. She could about who seemed to be the leader. He had dark black hair that hung straight over his head and looked unkempt. He had brown eyes the color of mud, a short but strongly built body that was built for combat, and had the scars to prove it. He wore a tight black fishnet that showed off his scarred body, with pants brown cargo shorts that ended halfway down the back of her waist, and regular dark blue shinobi shoes. If there was one thing Karina hated more than perverts, it was rapists, and from the lustful looks in those men's eyes as they held her, it was obvious what their intentions were. She held back the angry grimace that threatened to slide down her ruby-painted lips. She bent down to the bag that was tied around her and pulled out a kunai, and her students did the same. Suddenly, another 6 men, they appeared from the bushes surrounding them. A look of surprise appeared in their eyes. We can't let you fight back. Now, not after all. You might get hurt. The same man spoke again, waving his finger in a mocking gesture as a lazy smile spread across his face, the same look that was on all their faces. So how about you just give up, and we can all get what we want? He gestured with his bandaged hand towards his dinner friends, and just smiled. How about we don't do it with that dinner? And disappeared in the nothingness with the images of his Genin team doing the same body arrest technique. Much to the men's surprise, several dinners appeared behind each of them like a solid ghost, grabbing them by the nape of the neck with one arm. They all felt their body freeze. They couldn't move at all, no matter how hard they tried to make matters worse. They heard a humming sound like the one bees make. They saw a black cloud of insects surrounding them and draining their chakra from their hiding place. Naruto looked to Shino, waiting for him to give him the signal. Shino nodded, and that was all the confirmation he needed. After performing a few annual seals, he took a deep breath and fire-style dragon fire jutsu from his mouth. He exhaled a large stream of fire that came out as if it were a flamethrower. The fire reached the target, and loud screams of pain were heard as the men were burned alive. The smell of burning flesh hit their nostrils, and everyone almost vomited. In fact, when the smoke cleared, revealing the smoking and badly burned bodies of the dead men, and Nada was the first to vomit. Naruto looked at the men he had killed with a tinge of guilt in his eyes. However, he had killed before, so he didn't feel as guilty as most people would feel about their first kill. Naruto said Karina, and worried. She hated having to force her genin to kill. She was also worried about how he would react to her first kill. I'm fine, I've killed, before she replied in a monotone. Karina felt as if a ton of bricks would have fallen on his head. How could he forget the incident that happened 6 years ago? Was the talk of the entire village for over a month, all about how someone had broken into the old Namake's house, and how Naruto had been forced to kill 2 men who looked like Ambu. At first, she had been skeptical about the whole thing. Seriously, how could a 6-year-old boy kill 2 fully trained Ambu? It wasn't until Lokage confirmed the story and her best friend Anna, who had been part of the tracking team to investigate the scene, told her face to face that it was true. Now you have done it, said a hoarse voice behind them. They all looked in the direction the voice came from, and to their surprise, they found 3 men standing there, their skin slightly pink from the intense heat of the fire. How, she asked sadly and surprised as she was sure they had caught them all. The 3 men simply smiled in response. I'll tell you, when we're alone. Karina looked at the 3 men in front of her too, honing level, and Chunin hated what she was about to ask her genie to do, but she had no other choice. Naruto, you take care of the guy on the left, Shino, and Hinata team up and take care of the one behind, and I'll take care of the big mouth here, Shino. And then looked at Karina, and was surprised there were 2 honing and a Chunin left, and she had just ordered a lone genin to face a honing level missing Nin Sensei. I don't think it would be wise for Naruto to go against him alone, said Shino, trying to save her friend from what she could see was a very dangerous battle, one that Karina would not win. And she bit her lip. She had seen Naruto give it his all, and she knew he was powerful, but this was a mock battle. Although Kuzuno was barely holding back, he is her son, so she was sure at some point he could have landed a few hits. However, this was a honing level missing Nin he was not going to hold back. He was going to attack with the intent to kill. The problem was Naruto was the only one skilled enough to taking on one of the ninja alone, couldn't take on 2 honing level ninja at once. So his best plan at the moment was to finish their battle as quickly as he could, and then go help him shut it down. He looked at Naruto out of the corner of his eye and could see his Sharingan spinning frantically in preparation for battle. We have no choice, Naruto. Do you think you could keep him busy long enough for me to finish my battle? Naruto nodded. If you're done fighting each other, we can get on with this show, said the same man again, this time with annoyance. Okay, then team, you know what to do. Everyone nodded their heads. Shino's insect colony slowly came out of his raised arms, and from under the sleeve of his coat, taking off into the air. Hinata had her Bakugan activated and was standing in a Yuga Juken stance. Naruto had a kunai in reverse grip in his right hand. His hood was removed, showing his wild red hair. Vito and his Sharingan spinning frantically. Hello, Shino Chunin level, as missing ninja Shino and Hinata stood looking at their opponent as he grabbed him. From what they could see, the man was about 20 years old. He had short, close-cut hair that barely reached his shoulders. He had dark green eyes and pale white skin that almost matched Hinata's. He was wearing a dull-worn black t-shirt with baggy, torn green shorts that were ripped just below the knees. His cut-off forehead protector was strapped to his bandaged left arm. Fighting against 2 genins, I feel insulted, he said as he threw several kunai at them. Both easily dodged the kunai, but to their surprise, all the kunai had explosive notes tied to them. When the kunai exploded, both Shino and Hinata were forced to use a substation to get away from the blast radius. When they appeared unharmed through the smoke, the man sneered. He pulled out a kuna and attacked Shino head on. Shino retaliated by doing the same and fought the man. The area they were in was filled with sounds of clashing metal and the sight of several sparks arcing through the air. Every time a kunai collided with another, Shino was being pushed back by his opponent. He wasn't very good at hand-to-hand combat, and the man he was fighting was taking advantage of that. In a display of pure speed, he disappeared from Shino's sight and reappeared behind him. Shino Hinata tried to warn him, but it was too late. The man stabbed Shino in the back with the kunai. However, Shino dissolved into 1,000 insects. The insects swarmed the man, covering him from head to toe. Hinata swung at the captured man with her Bakugan active. The moment the insects moved away from the man, now very weakened, she attacked. She gathered chakra in her hand, making it glow blue momentarily, and quickly pushed her palm towards his chest. At first glance, it seemed all she had done was hit the man with her palm and sent him flying. However, to those with a Hatsu with prior knowledge of the techniques of fight Yuga, they would tell you otherwise. The chakra in his palm was sent directly to the man's chest, severing several of his arteries and tendons. He died instantly and painfully without realizing what he had done. He ran to where he could see his teammate. He found him leaning against a tree with his back to him and breathing heavily. "You are hatch injured," Shino asked. Had he seen the kunai stab him before he replaced it with a CL of his insects? "The kunai did not hurt me much, however. It seems that it was poison. My insects are trying to purge the poison, but I don't think so." From behind his glasses, his eyes rolled back, and he collapsed unconscious. Shino yelled, Hinata, her eyes wide in fear. "With Naruto. A few minutes earlier, a Sharingan user. I haven't fought one of those in quite a while," his opponent commented. Naruto ignored him and braced himself, a silent guy. How will soon change. That the man disappeared in a burst of speed and appeared in front of Naruto with his fist buried in his stomach. He smiled, assuming that he had finished his battle quickly and effortlessly. His eyes widened slightly as the Naruto he hit crumbled into dust, revealing that it had been an Earth clone. He looked around to find his target. When he looked up, he saw Naruto in the air, blasting a massive fire dragon. After performing a few hand seals, he shouted water-style water cannon jutsu from his mouth. He spat out a powerful beam of water that easily pierced through the fire attack and struck him again. Facing an unsuspecting Naruto who was still in the air, Naruto used his hands as a shield to block some of the force of the attack. But the attack was strong enough to send him flying and managed to break a few of his ribs. He crashed hard into the hard and unforgiving ground, creating spider web-like cracks on the ground. Sitting up, he put his hands on his broken ribs, and his hands began to glow green. A few seconds later, he had completely healed his ribs, so it was as if they had never been broken. At that moment, he was grateful to learn some medical ninjutsu from Subchan. Everyone had been pleasantly surprised to learn that although he had a large reserve of chakra, his control over it was almost perfect. He wasn't sure if it was because of his Adu or the constant use of his Sharingan that had improved his chakra control to where it was. But oh well, he wasn't complaining. His grandmother had happily taught him some medical ninjutsu. Although due to how complex and difficult it was, learning them hadn't meant much, just enough to heal some minor fractures and broken bones and stop some bleeding. Naruto silently cursed of all the opponents he had to face. It had to be the one that used water. What did a water type honing on Kyumo anyway? And didn't Kyumo specialize in ninjutsu and despotic lightning-style kenjutsu? He slightly regretted having focused so much on fire-style jutsu. He had some water and earth jutsu, but none of them were strong enough to overpower his opponent. He made a silent promise to learn more earth and water jutsu. When he got home, after all, he could easily convince his grandmother to allow him access to the Senju library. That was, of course, if he came out of this battle alive. He jumped just in time to avoid several Kuin strikes on the same spot. He had been standing. He looked at where the kunai were coming from and saw his opponent looking at him from the tree he was standing on with a smug look on his face. "I'm surprised you survived that attack." His opponent growled darkly with a murderous glint in his eyes. "Let me rectify that water-style giant." Water dragon, water-style giant, water dragon. They both screamed at the same time, spitting out large balloons of water that transformed into giant dragons with snake-like body structures and glowing yellow eyes. The dragons met in the middle of the space between the two ninjas, and upon impact, they exploded, creating a huge wave of water that sent both ninjas floating. Naruto deflected a kunai that was coming towards him with his own, and without giving him time to recover, the honing attacked him head-on. Naruto blocked each blow that the honing sent him with a slight difficulty. It is true that his Sharingan could predict each and every one of the attacks, but the honing was faster than him, which made it difficult for him to defend himself. Seeing that the honing gained advantage with each passing moment, he jumped away from the head that was attacking him, and after performing a few hand seals, spoke fire-style. Great Fire Dragon launched several dragon-headed fireballs, all directed at its opponent. He heard Hinata scream, terrified and worried. Shino looked worriedly towards where his voice had come from, and that distraction cost him dearly. The fire jutsu hit the ground covered in water and vaporized into mist, and the honing appeared above him with a swollen mouth and hands in a seal. When he tried to move, he found that he couldn't. He looked down and saw chains made of water holding his feet to the ground-style water cannon jutsu. He chanted the honing in his head and spat out a powerful beam of boiling water with lava directly towards Naruto, who was tied up and struggling with his Sharingan. Naruto could see that the attack was significantly more powerful than the one the missing nin had used before due to the large amount of chakra that was used in the jutsu and the steam that was coming off of it. He didn't think he could survive. He didn't have a fire jutsu strong enough to vaporize the jutsu of water cannon, and there was not enough time for him to cast any jutsu. He did not scream desperate with his head turned to the side, and his eyes closed tightly. He raised his arms in a defensive cross formation for a few seconds. There was a movement towards the north. Then he heard a loud explosion, like steaming water, hitting something solid. He waited a few more seconds, and still heard nothing nor felt any imminent attack or pain. Tentatively, he opened his eyes and was surprised to find himself surrounded by wood and what? It seemed to be a cocoon of wood that stretched out around him while leaving the back open in a bar. Think of the cocoon-like wall that Yamato used to block the shockwave from the battle. Against the four-tailed Naruto and Orochimaru, the Jonin landed softly on the ground with a smug look on his face as he looked at the spot where his attack had hit. The area was covered in steam from the boiling water. He was sure the battle was over, though. He had to give him credit. Who deserved it? The boy he fought was very good for someone his age to go against him and actually hold out that long on his own. That had been impressive. However, in the end, it was a honing with more battle experience he was about to head over to Dawn. He had heard that scream. After all, he still had a job to do. However, before he could do it, he was attacked. He jumped just in time to avoid large branches of wood that sprouted from the ground where he had been standing. Kyuk asked, surprised, shocked at being attacked by wood. As far as he knew, the wood ninjutsu style had only been used in history by one person, and only one person. The first cage of the Hidden Leaf Village looked around, trying to find who had sent the attack. He got out, he screamed. Finding no one, he jumped again as more wooden branches sprouted from the ground. Only this time the branches and tree roots chased him like a ghost. Naruto appeared standing a few meters from the honing. Teru stammered, taking a step back. However, what he didn't see was the large tree behind him until it was too late. The roots and branches of the tree grabbed him, wrapping themselves tightly around his body, tying him to the tree so he couldn't move. Naruto approached the man and with a quick movement stabbed him in the chest, right where his heart was killing him instantly. When the man died, Naruto fell to the ground on his knees, gasping at the fact that those branches and roots attacked without having ever done so before, especially without having had any kind of training. He had drained his chakra almost to exhaustion. He stood up slowly, using the trees for support as he walked towards his teammates. The trees that had sprouted during his fight with the honing, helping him greatly, slowly sank into the ground, and the branches that held the now dead man returned to their correct position. He never noticed a plant-like figure sinking into the ground with a single eye yellow looking at him. The leader, Sama, will be interested in this. XX Naruto arrived where his teammates were, which was not far from where their battle had just taken place. He saw Hinata crouched on the ground, floating protectively over Shino, who lay unconscious and motionless. Thinking the worst, he quickened his pace, forcing his aching and very exhausted body. What's wrong? He asked Hinata, surprising the poor girl, displeased by the feeling of being so weak. He took out of his pocket a small bottle with several red pills at. Taking one of them, he felt his chakra replenishing. He had been poisoned. Without wasting a moment, Naruto pulled out another bottle from his pocket that was filled with yellow pills. He pulled out a single pill and opened Shino's mouth and placed it on his tongue. He slowly tilted Shino's head up, and with his other hand, he gently caressed Shino's throat. These actions had the effect of making the unconscious Shino instinctively swallow the pill. Hinata had been silent the entire time process. He spoke when he finished. What did you give him? Is a special pill that my grandmother made. She gave it to us when we graduated from the academy. The pills prevent any infection or poison from spreading within the body or bloodstream. However, they only last about 5 hours before they stop working completely, he explained as he put the pills in his pocket. We have to get him to a hospital soon. Hinata, can you use your Yugon and tell if Sensei is done or if he is still fighting that ninja? Missing Sensei is right here, Karina said, and appearing behind them. Is everyone okay? She asked, already automatically checking Shino. The two Genins nodded. Shino has been poisoned. I have given him some medicine to stop the poison from spreading, but it will wear off soon, Naruto said to Kurenai. She nodded and inwardly cursed that her Genin was in a life-threatening situation on their first real mission. Are they both unharmed enough to travel? Kurenai asked. Hinata hadn't put up much of a fight and hadn't suffered any serious life-threatening injuries, so she was fine. However, Naruto had fought a battle to the death with a honing, and had it not been for the chakra pill he had taken, he would have collapsed to the ground exhausted. They both nodded dinner and took Shino in his arms, carrying him bridal style. We will move as fast as we can to get back to Konoha and take breaks along the way as needed. However, our first priority is to get Shino back to Konoha as fast as we can, Kurenai said seriously. With that, Team OO rushed towards Konoha as fast as they could to save the life of their teammates slash best friends slash student XXAR. I'm so bored right now because nothing exciting ever happens, Kotetsu growled, banging his head against the small gate post he had been summoned to. I don't see why you're complaining. You're the one who suggested keeping an eye on me. Who stood up and started staring at him, said someone, getting their attention. They both looked in the direction of the voice and saw a slightly bruised Karina holding Shino in her arms. Her other two genins were standing behind her. They both noticed that Naruto's clothes were torn, and there was a large hole in his stomach showing his skin. They were both shocked to find that Hinata had damage to her form and just seemed to be tired. Oh, can you come over for dinner? She nodded her head and continued running towards the village, heading to the hospital with her two genins following behind her. What do you think happened to them? Isamo asked after the team disappeared from sight, shrugging. I don't know, whatever it was, it must have been bad to put them in that kind of state, Kotetsu replied, and Isamo nodded. They both stayed silent for a while before I'm boring, Kotetsu complained. Shut up, Kotetsu. You're the one who chose this job, Isamo said, annoyed. It's your fault for agreeing with me in the first place, Kotetsu replied, getting up again. And the cycle continues. A few hours later, after dropping Shino off at the hospital, he had dinner and left his team to go give instructions on the mission to the Okage, though not before telling them that he would give the team 2 weeks off. Naruto walked towards the Senja house with a solemn look on his face, his thoughts returning to the mission. They had just completed the mission. A simple delivery mission turned out to be very dangerous one that almost cost them their lives. He clenched his fist tightly. His best friend had almost died on that mission. The thought made him stop for a second. He knew of the dangers and sacrifices of being a shinobi. His parents had made sure to make them understand that being a shinobi was not like most people thought it was. That as a shinobi, there were times when you would have to kill, watch your comrades die, murder innocent people, all for a mission. He had taken those words seriously, but after that close encounter with those missing ninjas, it had been a true revelation to him. His thoughts drifted to his own struggle, even though he had held his own, and even won against a Honing. He had lost the battle. It had shown him his weaknesses. He was relying too much on his fire ninjutsu. It's true, he had some water and earth-style jutsu, but they were too few. He had barely put any effort into earth and water affinity, something he would rectify. Soon he remembered how he too had almost died if he hadn't used the Mokuton Jutsu to grow that wall-like shell. Surely now would be in the afterlife. Mokuton suddenly realized that he had used the Nin Hut, his wood style. The famous would release that the first cage used the ability that allowed said man to capture and tame all the Biju. He almost jumped with excitement. He had obtained such a powerful ability. His strength would surely increase now. And it was inevitable. He couldn't wait to tell his family, especially his grandmother. She would be excited to know that he could use the same ability that he had used her grandfather, and for her it meant that the Senja blood would not die only with her, but would also continue with Naruto and their children. She stopped a bit as she was going to train using the wood release. She didn't know how she had used it in the first place, nor did she know anyone alive who had it. It was like her Sharingan. When she woke it up, she had no idea how to use it. The most embarrassing thing was that when she first woke it up, she didn't even know how to activate and turn it off. But at least back then she had the Ukiya library to help her. That he screamed in his mind, just like he learned to control his Sharingan in the Ukiya library. He could also learn about would release in the Senja library. The first cage must have left some notes about his would release in case one of the Senja kids could wake him up, and hopefully some jutsu to go along with those notes. So now his goals were to first learn how to use would release and practice and improve his affinities with earth and water. With that in mind, Naruto continued his way home. Before he could do any of that, he first needed to get some rest. He had managed to hold it off so they could get to the village quickly, but he was exhausted. He hadn't fully recovered from their fight. His body ached all over. He added some extra speed to his step, and the sooner he got home, the sooner he could finally rest. XXXX with Hinata. Just like Naruto walked towards her house deep in thought, her mind constantly replaying the events that had happened place during the mission. She had never felt so useless. In her life, her teammates and sensei had fought against their enemies, and she had barely done anything to help Shino against his own enemies. She bit her lip when she thought of Naruto, her teammate. He had single-handedly fought and won against a Honing level N that he didn't have, and yet she had barely been able to defend herself against a Chunin level N with the help of Shino, and that was what infuriated her. If Naruto had been able to win against a Honing, and she had had trouble fighting a Chunin, what did that say about his strength? She knew he was strong from his battle against her sensei, but now she could truly see how strong he was, and the gap between their strengths was not something to laugh at that moment. She was the weakest on the team. She was the one holding it, a burden they had to carry. She clenched her fists so hard it almost made her bleed. She no longer said in a low voice from now on, she swore that she would become stronger, that she would no longer be a charge, would walk beside her teammates and not behind them. She would show them the true innate yuga. She started running towards the yuga complex with determination burning deep in her eyes. She had some training to do. XXXXXXXXXXX 2 days later, her body no longer hurt. Her chakra was fully restored. All her muscles were healed. She had to tell the truth. She loved her Guinness. Her Swaki Senju not only had a large amount of chakra and almost perfect control of that chakra, but his body's natural healing cup was second to his sister's Jinchuriki. He walked towards the hospital with 2 people in mind. The hospital was near the Oakage Tower, which was close to the Senju compound, so it didn't take long to get there. Even from afar, he could see the large building that easily towered over many of the other buildings. He couldn't help but marvel at its size. The hospital was one of the most important buildings in the Leaf Village, responsible for saving and healing hundreds of injured people a day. And to think that his grandmother ran everything. He reached the straight path that led to the double doors that led inside the massive building. He entered the building and was immediately greeted by the smiling face of a nurse sitting at the reception desk. "Hello, what can I do for you today?" she said with a warm smile on her face. Naruto returned the smile slightly. In response, "I'm here to see my teammate. He was brought here yesterday." "What's his name?" replied the kind nurse, pulling out a file under his desk. "Shino Aburame. "Oh, here he is," he exclaimed successfully. "He says they brought him yesterday and sent him to the emergency room. He is currently in room 204 recovering. You can see him." "Thank you," replied Naruto, walking towards the room. "It's no problem. Do you want me to take you outside?" "To the room," he said horribly with a pink tint on his cheek. Naruto simply raised an eyebrow at his behavior. "No thanks, I know the room," he said kindly, walking away. He had been to the hospital many times before and knew the place. The nurse sighed dreamer as he watched the young red-haired boy walk away. He had to admit that for someone so young, he was handsome, with those deep, beautiful blue eyes, the intense, spiky red hair that reached his shoulders, the perfectly tanned skin, and Clara, an angular face with almost no baby fat. Judging by who his parents were, especially his father, she could only imagine how active he would be when he was older. She didn't like it, wouldn't mind having a chance with someone as handsome as him, no matter the age difference. Too bad he had to compete with almost all the women in the Leaf Village. He sighed again as he watched him disappear around the corner. A girl could only dream of that XXXXXXX. Naruto walked past the many doors of the hospital, some empty and others he didn't. Contain a shiver as he headed to his destination. The way the nurse at the reception desk had been looking at him had scared the red-haired boy. He reminded him too much like the way Ami, and to a lesser extent, and didn't look at him during the academy. Those looks, the way their eyes lit up with emotion, and what he could identify as lust every time his eyes fell on her figure. He was sure that if he ever dropped his gourd near any of the women of Konoha, he would have lost his virginity a long time ago. He saw the room where Shino was said to be. When he entered the room, he found Shino sleeping in the hospital bed. He was not surprised at Absolute seeing him in his black Aburame sunglasses and his secretiveness. He scoffed a little. He had honestly never seen his friend in them, or any of the men in his clan for that matter. Maybe he should ask Shino why they like to wear black glasses so much. Leaving his little mental observation for later, he walked over to Shino and sat down in the chair next to his bed. He sat there silently, not sure what to do or say. He began to feel uncomfortable. He looked at Shino and could see his chest constantly rising and falling. He was hooked up to some machine that indicated he wasn't in any danger. The poison had been completely removed from his system. 10 minutes passed, and Naruto hadn't moved his chair. He stood up from his chair and pulled a small blue card out of his pocket. He put the card on the window and walked out of the room. Tsunade sighed exasperatedly as she stared at the mountain of papers on her desk. If she had known that being the head medic Neen would force her to sit behind a desk and do so much paperwork, she would never. He would have agreed. Looking at the large amount of documents still waiting to be read, signed and approved, he rubbed his temples. "I need a break." He pulled a small golden key out of his pocket and walked over to the picture frame of his family that was on the wall. He removed the picture from the wall, and behind it was a safe. He opened the safe using the key he had pulled out of his pocket. This was where he kept a secret stash of his stress reliever. He smiled to himself. Shizen may know where all his other secret sports, but not this one. She had made sure to hide it perfectly and make it inaccessible to anyone but herself. She opened the safe and found an empty safe except for a carefully folded note. She took the note and read, "Drinking is not good for you, son. Sama, with love." Shizen. On the back of the note, a smiling Shizen was drawn, giving her a thumbs-up gesture. Sanade began to tremble. Her eyes shone with righteous fury. She raised her foot and quickly he took him to the ground. The action shook the entire room, and also a good part of the eye crack marks appeared on the floor where Shizen had stepped. When I have that little one in my hands, his furious, murderous thoughts were stopped by someone he knew at the door. Knock, knock, knock. Come in, he said to calm her down a little. He would look for his little apprentice. Later the door opened, and a boy with a red coat entered that he instantly recognized. Naren exclaimed happily, forgetting his anger at seeing his grandson. He walked towards him, and she hugged him, burying the poor boy in her generous bosom. After an eternity on Naruto's part of hugging and smothering the poor boy, she finally let him go when he had freed himself from what he could only say was one of the most dangerous situations in his young life, second only to being trapped in a room full of fangirls. Naruto took a deep breath to replace the oxygen he had been deprived of seconds ago. He looked at his grandmother, who in all honesty didn't look like a grandmother at all considering her age. He wondered how she looked so young. He would have asked her, but he wasn't willing to risk making her angry. He had seen how she reacted when he got angry. His grandfather learning to fly was proof of that. He straightened up, not noticing the blush on his face. But unfortunately for him, Tsunade noticed that my little Naren is blushing. He gasped, putting his hand over his mouth. Don't tell me you've fallen in love with me. You know that incest, Naren, is forbidden. He put a hand under his cheek in a thoughtful attitude. Come on now, you're so cute. I'll make an exception. To say that Naruto was embarrassed would be an understatement. His face was as red as his hair. He was stuttering words, trying to defend himself. Tsunade could only laugh at her failed attempts at denial that her grandson was making. After laughing for a while, and her mood improved dramatically, she decided to put him out of his misery. Calm down. I'm just kidding, boy. You're a little too young for my taste. Naruto breathed a sigh of relief, and the blush on his face faded. Honestly, why? His grandmother and mother liked to tease him or irritate him as often as they could. It was like they enjoyed watching him embarrass himself or lose his cool. But that couldn't be true. Tsunade glared at him. I mean, back on. She quickly corrected herself. Tsunade sat down in her chair and motioned for him to sit in the chair in front of her desk. I don't think this is a social visit, is it? Naruto sighed inwardly. It was so readable. I didn't come here to ask you for something, Tsunade admitted, narrowed her eyes, and arched an eyebrow. Oh, what's wrong? Naruto shifted in his seat. He felt like he was back in the Ukiya compound, asking Fugaku for permission to enter the clan library. He tried to calm his growing nervousness. This was his grandmother. She loved him, surely she would agree. Could you? And Nad spit it out, he said. Tsunade, can I use the library? Senju snapped. Tate blinked. That was all. That was the reason. He was so nervous. All he wanted to ask for was to use the library. It's not like there was anything important in it or nothing. Without Tsunade knowing, she had been silent the whole time as she thought about the stupid reason for her grandson's behavior, and her silence was making said boy very nervous. Sure, you can use the library all you want, she said matter-of-factly. Naruto's sweat dropped at that. Here he was having a mental breakdown, worried that she was going to refuse, or worse yet, explode on him. And she had simply given him permission to go to the library without too much concern. Seeing the expression on his face, relief on Naruto's face, Tsunade laughed inwardly. Her grandson, an only living blood relative, was certainly an odd one out compared to his sisters. Unlike Tomi and Kari, who were very loud, very open, and too cheerful, Naruto was the odd one out. He was reserved, quiet, and rarely spoke out loud. And truth be told, she was worried about him. She knew how people treated him, the expectations everyone had for him. She was worried that just like the Ukiya prodigy Itachi, he too would crumble under the pressure and do things that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He would often spy on him as he trained himself into the ground, wanting to become more powerful to show his worth to everyone else. He wondered what would happen if he got that power. Would he turn evil and abandon his family and friends, and become a power-hungry tyrant like his teammate, worse yet, Madara? Or would he use that power to protect his loved ones and the village like his grandfather, with the influence of his family, of his friend? She knew he wouldn't fall to the dark side, or at least that's what she hoped. Her grandson was destined for great things, that much was to come, and that he was going to change the world for better or worse. Putting her thoughts aside, she stood up a little to pinch his cheek. You shouldn't overthink things, Naruto. One day you're going to get a brain tumor. Naruto rubbed his now sore cheek and gave him an annoyed look. Says one of the smartest women in the village, replied Naruto. Don't be cheeky with me, brat, she said. Tsunade, amused by his response. They both fell silent after that, as he wasn't leaving, and the accumulation of papers on her desk would only increase if they didn't deal with them. Is there anything else you want? She finally asked. Something happened to me on the last mission I had. Naruto began to get Tsunade's attention. She had heard from Minato about the mission. He was talking about they had been on a rank mission when a group of missing nin had attacked from what she had been told, and the mission report she had read Naruto had fought one of the Honin, and had earned the scolding she had given Minato for allowing a group of inexperienced genin to go on a C-rank mission after they had been a team for only 2 months. And to make matters worse, her grandson was on that team. Of course, Minato had defended himself by saying that sooner or later Naruto was going to move up to a higher rank, and that he was strong, which she agreed with, and that going on higher rank missions would give him the experience that she needed. She had calmed down after that and had stormed out of his office, threatening him that if his grandson or granddaughters got hurt on one of those missions, he would be in for a world of hurt. She knew she was wrong. She couldn't protect them forever. Sooner or later, they, just like she did a long time ago, would go on their own missions and leave their own lives behind. But as long as she still could, she would be the overprotective grandmother. What happened to you? She asked with a hint of concern in her voice. When I was fighting the missing, In caught me, and he was surely going to kill me with a powerful water jutsu, until Tsunade said, now nervous. Her hands were shaking slightly. I had almost died when the jutsu was about to hit him. I closed my eyes and felt something blocking it. When I opened them, I saw a cocoon similar to a wooden wall blocking it. Then I attacked it using roots and trees. In the end, I caught it and tied it to a tree with roots and branches and killed it. Silence. Tsunade's mind went out for a moment. I knew it existed, the possibility of him inheriting the wood release from his grandfather, but the possibility was so remote that he had almost forgotten about it. Getting over his surprise, he jumped out of the chair and grabbed Naruto, who yelled in surprise. Can you show me? He said after letting him go. Naruto rubbed the back of his neck. Well, you see, that's the problem. I don't know how I used it in the first place. It was something that came up on the spot. That's why I asked you to use the Senja library in the first place. Well, that won't be of much help. Naruto looked at her confused. The information in that library is the same one you'll find at the local library. Naruto physically deflated at that. How is he going to learn about wood release now? But there's a hidden secret room that I know you'll definitely find what you're looking for. And he finished. Can you show it to me? Naruto said excitedly, his voice a little louder than usual. Tsunade looked at the paperwork on his desk, and then at his cute and hopeful grandson. Paperwork, Naruto, paperwork, definitely Naruto. Let's go right now. I needed a break from everyone. Well, he said cheerfully, getting up from his desk and walking over to Naruto, grabbing his shoulder. They both disappeared in a swirl of leaves. He went to the Senja house. Naruto leaned forward, feeling a little dizzy from the transport. Sorry, I forgot about that. You'll get used to it, Tsunade said, rubbing his back to relieve the vertigo he was feeling. The Shunin was a fast-moving transport that had the unpleasant effect of causing nausea due to the high speed at which the body moved. Most of the time, Naruto was in a hurry, but he was still in a hurry. The honings and chunin usually overcome the effects after constant use of Shunin. Are you okay? Yes, I'm fine. That was disconcerting, Naruto said, feeling the vertigo passing. Tsunade gave him an apologetic look. That Shunin for you? Naruto nodded, wondering if he too could learn it someday. It seemed like an effective technique for traveling short distances. Could you teach it to me? Tsunade gave him an amused smile as she walked into the house. She had expected him to ask her. That was her grandson, always looking for ways to improve. You will find it in the local library. It is a ranked technique. Naruto opened his eyes, slightly surprised, but did not make any further comment. He could not believe that such a technique was accessible even to the students of the academy. To think that if he had learned that technique a long time ago, traveling to his little secret training camp would have been much easier. He followed his grandmother silently. As she led him to the basement, he turned on the lights, and what he saw surprised him. Shelves and more. Shelves full of scrolls and books. He actually let out an audible gasp. All that information had been under his feet the whole time, and he hadn't once bothered to check the basement. Your sisters usually spend some time here learning some jutsu. I'm surprised you didn't actually know about this library, huh? But why didn't you tell me? You never asked. Naruto replied sweetly, seriously. That was the best excuse he could come up with. Enough of that gaping. You can check the library another time. Right now, we still have something important we're looking for, right? Well, they went through the numerous shelves to the back of the large underground library. Naruto raised an eyebrow. As they stood in front of a wall, he was shocked again when his grandmother began to check some seals. Kai yelled as she slammed her hands on the ground, and to her amazement, a complex seal array formed on the ground. Tsunade bit her thumb and pressed her bleeding finger onto the seals. The seals began to glow and the ground began to shake slightly. A horizontal square stone slowly slid away from the ground where the seals were, and behind it you could see a star box that led to the depths of the ground. Tsunade did not hesitate. and went down the stairs. She looked at her grandson, stupefied. "Well, you're not coming," Naruto nodded, and with hesitant steps, he followed her. They didn't walk more than a few steps before reaching a dead end. The light from the library gave them a clear view of the steps and the wall of the alley. No way out. Naruto could see a hole in a key that strangely looked like a Tsunade took the necklace from around her neck and inserted it into the key, and to his surprise, it fit perfectly. Wall began to shake and began to fall to the ground, but not before Tsunade took the crystal necklace again. Naruto blinked when he saw what was behind the wall. It was a small room with a table, a chair, and a few scrolls neatly folded in a box under the table. It looked like a study that sent red flags into his mind. Why would someone go to so much trouble to hide a study? This used to be the secret study of the first, and at a later date, the second OC. They used this room to have private meetings here. Tsunade explained, making some of the scrolls in that box were written by the first box. They contain information about his would release and how to control it. Naruto almost fainted from shock. This same room was used by previous Okage, and his grandmother was going to give him scrolls written by the first box himself. First, I felt her lips began to tremble. I didn't know if from happiness or excitement. She did something that Tsunade never expected him to do. He launched himself at her and hugged her and was laughing with excitement. "Thanks, Bakon. I don't know what to say," he said happily, still hugging her. Tsunade patted him on the head. For once, she didn't really care about the gesture. "Don't think about it, brat. Besides, if I don't help my grandson become strong, how is he going to bring a strong woman to give me many, many strong and healthy grandchildren?" A small blush appeared on Naruto's face, which made Tsunade laugh lightly. "So what are you waiting for? That box isn't going to open by itself." Naruto bent down and began to drag the box with the scrolls inside. He pulled the box out from under the table and saw something that caught his attention. Under the box, there was a small handle. Curious, he opened it and saw a large scroll inside. "A Bakon. What is this?" he said. After taking out the rather large scroll and showing it to his grandmother, Tate looked at the scroll with a raised eyebrow and said, "I'm not going to open it." Naruto. He took a closer look at the side of the scroll, and something could be read writing on it, but it was covered in dust. When he removed the dust, he saw a single word, Igel, written in kanji vertically. His eyes lit up as he recognized what the scroll was. "Naruto-en. Do you know what this is?" she said out loud, almost screaming. Naruto almost jumped when he heard her scream, honestly having no idea what the giant scroll was. He shook his head. "This is a summoning contract. Not just any contract, but the same contract that my grandfather used. I thought it had been lost years ago, but now here it is." Naruto was sure his brain was going to explode sooner or later from the many surprises he had seen today. First, there was an entire library underneath his house that everyone knew about except him. Then his grandmother showed him a secret meeting room that was once used by the Okage. Then his grandmother was giving him scrolls that were written by the first OCG, and now he was looking at a summoning contract that was used by the first Ikage. Didn't even know she had a summoning contract. Maybe she should activate her Sharingan to make sure this wasn't a dream or some powerful Jujutsu. After all, her brain could only take so many surprises in one day. While Naruto was having a mental problem, Tsunade was having one of her own. She was excited, ecstatic. She couldn't believe she had found something as important as this. This was a summoning contract that her grandfather had used on her. It was as if it were a relic of her clan, something to prove that her clan hadn't completely disappeared. She had a few things that reminded her clan of her family. The necklace she had was one of the few things she had to remind her family her belongings had been lost during the war, stolen or taken by the village. She could still remember the day when her father had one day offered to sign the contract. Unfortunately, by then she had already signed the slug contract. Her father had been left a little disappointed, but the promise that her youngest son, her little brother, would sign the contract. However, it didn't go as planned. She looked at the contract. She was definitely never going to use it. She already had a summoning contract. Now, what was she going to do with it? She looked at Naruto, who seemed to be deep in thought, and his eyes lit up. Maybe she wouldn't have been able to sign it herself back then, but maybe her grandson would. She looked at him again. He was the only living Senju left who could do it, and it's a perfect candidate. And Archan said, sweetly bringing him out of his thoughts, "Yes, would you like to sign the contract of summoning the eagle Kyuk?" "I yes you, unless for some reason there is another Naren here." "Thanks, Bacha. I am really grateful for what you have done for me today. Don't think about it. Besides, you will pay me back later with many grandchildren, right?" "Right," said Naruto, slowly took the summoning contract and placed it on the ground. He unrolled it and saw two names written on it, Senju, Sarama Senju Keiji. "Who was that?" Naruto asked, reading the names written on the contract. Tsunade frowned as she looked at the names written on the scroll. "Tatar," grandfather said sadly, as she looked at her father's name, putting aside the depressing emotions that were coming up and putting a smile on her face. All you have to do is sign the contract, writing your name with your blood. Naruto nodded his head. He tapped his big toe and wrote his name. So he could summon you. Draw your blood from the hand. You sign the contract with contract. The type and size of summon you want to summon is determined by how much chakra you use. The more chakra you add, the bigger it will be. The summoning hand seals are boar, dog, bird, monkey, ram. And then you say summoning jutsu. And that's it. Naruto nodded, listening to his grandmother. Thank you again, Bae. Chan XXX. After parting ways with his grandmother, he walked towards his secret training ground. Upon reaching the training ground, the ground was now covered in small patches of grass. Green had long since filled the crater that was in the middle of the training ground. That fight with his mother had really taken a toll on his private training ground. Luckily, the ground that was once blackened was now a healthy green. He opened the box with the scrolls inside and began to look through them. He looked at the scrolls and was glad to find one that had water manipulation written on it. He put the scroll aside to use later. He found another scroll that had earth manipulation written on it. Kamami, he must be happy with me today, he said quietly. After all, he had promised to improve his earth and water manipulation. And today, he only found scrolls in them. What were the skills? After searching through some scrolls, he finally found it. It was a simple green scroll at the bottom of the box. He opened it, and instantly his eyes lit up at what he saw. The wood release is a combination of water and earth chakra, so one can gain good control of Mokuton ninjutsu. Must have a good control over his affinities with earth and water. Naruto looked at the two scrolls on water and earth manipulation and sighed. I guess there's no way around it. He closed the scroll he was reading and sealed it. Water and earth manipulation location Oakage building Honing Hall. The Oakage silently looked at all the assembled Honing with his eyebrows furrowed. Could someone go find Kakashi and tell him that if he's not here in the next 10 seconds, I'll demote him to Henin for a month and ban the production and distribution of Achacha Paradise in the Country of Fire, he said menacingly. 10-9-8-7-6-5-43. Duyo said Kakashi, appearing in the middle of the room. Minato just sighed and ignored his students' antics and continued with the reason he was there in the first place, taking a small breath. As you all may or may not know, the Chunin exams are coming up, and this year they will be held in our village. If there is any Honing sensei who thinks their Genin team is ready for participate in the Chunin exams, I stepped forward now, looking around the room, looking at the many Honing sensei who seemed to be having a mental debate with themselves. I attacked Kakashi with incense and team. If I would like to nominate my team for the Chunin exams, several people began to mutter to themselves. Yoyu Kurenai, the Honing sensei of Team 8. I would like to nominate my team for the Chunin exams, said Kurenai, stepping forward, standing next to Kakashi. And I was here hoping you guys wouldn't side. I Salivasuma, the sense Honing of Team 10. I would like to nominate my team for the Chunin exams, said the lazy smoker. He too stepped forward and stood next to Kurenai. Yo mate guy, the beautiful green beast of Konoha. I would like to nominate my young students for the Chunin exams, yelled excitedly a man who looked like an adult version of him, giving everyone a thumbs up and a beautiful smile, in whose eyes he was the everyone's thoughts and Kuzunahan incense and Tomi's. I would like to nominate my Genin for the Chunin exams, Kusina said, shyly rubbing the back of her head. When she realized she only had one Genin on her team, Minato looked at Sensei Honing in front of him, nodded in approval. Very well, then teams 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 will be able to participate in the next Chunin exams. Finally, having had enough, Irika said, back to what I thought. Forgive my intrusion, Okagesima, but no, I think it's wise to allow those Genin to participate in the exams. They've only been Genins for 6 or 7 months. They're not ready to participate in something like the Chunin exams, he pleaded. He had taught all of those students to him. They were like his little brothers and sisters, and he'd be damned if he let them be killed for participating in something they clearly weren't ready for. You have to realize something, Irika San, said Kakashi, seriously looking Irika straight in the eyes. They may have been your students, but they are our Genin now. We have trained them, we have taken them on missions, giving them the experience they need to survive the harsh realities of a child. You can't feed them like babies forever, Urukin. They are our Genin now, which means we know what is best for them. But Kakashi is right. Irika, you can't protect them forever. They are their Genin now. They know what is best for themselves, said the Okage with a hint of firmness in his voice. Irika fell silent after that, but everyone, they could clearly see the look of disapproval on her face. As a final note, since Akari doesn't have a team to participate with, and there are no available spots on any team, she will be allowed to choose which team to join for the duration of the exams. XXXXXXX Naruto walked towards his private training grounds, thinking deeply earlier today Karina, and she had told them that she had nominated them for the chunning exams that had made his day. The chance to become chunning was something that he had honestly thought he wouldn't make it until at least next year. He couldn't help but laugh a little when he thought about the exams. It was a chance to test himself against other Jinnins from different parts of the elemental nations, and a chance to become chunning. And becoming chunning would have its many advantages, such as taking on higher ranking missions. So wrapped up in his thoughts, Naruto didn't realize he was messing with someone until it was too late. "Hey, watch where you're going," he yelled at him, a female voice. As she faced the person, sorry, she wasn't paying attention to where she was going. She apologized, looking at the person he had bumped into was a girl who looked to be at least a year older than him. She was a little taller than him by a few centimeters. She had long, straight blonde hair that was tied up with tight bandages, and she had deep, dark onyx eyes as her outfit. She was wearing a purple and black short-sleeve blouse, both with a cloud design. The last thing he noticed about her was that she had a forehead protector. As while Naruto looked the girl up and down, she was also looking at him. He noticed that the boy he had run into had intense dark red hair with some spikes and two small bangs on the sides of his face. He honestly had the darkest blue eyes she had ever seen in her life. He was wearing a white hooded t-shirt and a long blue shirt tucked in. "It's okay. Nothing happened," she said, giving him a small smile. "Once again, I'm sorry about that, ma'am." "Yujito." "Naruto, it was a pleasure meet you, Yujito. And I hope we have the opportunity to meet again. But for now, I have to continue on my way," said Naruto, bowing slightly. "The same, I say, Naruto-zan," answered Yujito with a small bow, and the two continued their walk in separate directions. "What do you think? There is something in him that is not right. He is strong. By how his chakra feels, I would say that he is very strong as well as handsome. A perfect partner for you, Kitten Nimbai. I am not in the mood for your perverted rumors. Right now, I can already see him kidnapping that god of a man and taking Nimbai's stupid perverted cat and ride the beast Nimbai. That's it. I'm going to cut the fight." "Don't wait," Yujito sighed. Tired dealing with Nimbai was even worse than dealing with her sensei. Continued walking until she reached a large hotel. Upon entering the hotel, she found her teammates resting on the couch. "How was the walk?" asked a blonde-haired girl with a bust that shouldn't belong to a girl her age. "It was refreshing," she answered. Honestly, Konoha was very different from Kumo. There were a lot of trees, and most of the people she saw were civilians, and there was a happy feeling in the village. Unlike her village, where most of the things she could find were rocks and mountains, most of the people there are ninjas, and very few civilians. "Did you find anything interesting?" Samui asked with her expressionless face. As always, she gave her friend a mocking smile. "Could you say that X of the next morning with Team 8th entered the academy building, and everyone was shocked at the finding a large group of people yelling at two people who were blocking the door to the room they were supposed to be in. Jinjutsu." Naruto instantly realized upon looking at the door number it was written 109th, and he knew from past experience that this was the second floor, and the real room, 209, was on the third floor. "Should we do something?" Shino asked, as he saw a Leaf Genin wearing a green jumpsuit get punched in the face for trying to get into the fake room. "They are not using the Jinjutsu to eliminate weak teams. If we told everyone, it would only give us a bigger competition later on," Naruto explained, walking towards the stairs, avoiding being seen by everyone. "Could you stop carrying that fake Jinjutsu? You are not fooling anyone," shouted an arrogant and loud voice, attracting everyone's attention. "Idiot," Naruto thought as he turned around to see who was dumb enough to shout that for everyone to hear. He was not that surprised at see Team 7 standing there, Kiba in front, giving them all a cocky smile. "Then you notice," said one of the teens standing in the doorway, before smiling as well and disappearing at full speed, reappearing a second later in front of Kiba with his foot raised in a kicking motion, a kick that never reached its target. "That doesn't mean I'm letting you pass," what he said in shock as he saw a hand holding his foot, a hand belonging to the same boy wearing the green monkey. "I didn't even see him move," he thought to him. What happened to being subtle? A girl with brown hair tied in two buns asked from behind, who also wore a pink sleeveless blouse with red trim on the sleeves and yellow snap buttons, as well as dark green pants. "I'm sorry, Tintin, but I couldn't let him hurt a fellow Leaf," she said at the time, called to him, giving him her big idiotic smile. "It's been and you found us out," she said, angrily punching him on the top of the head. A second later, he stood up, apparently and relieved from the blow he had received from his teammate. The moment he saw Sakura, his eyes lit up, and in the blink of an eye, he was standing in front of her. "Hello, I'm the next beautiful green beast of Konoha. Please go out with me. I will protect you with my life," he shouted passionately, holding the hand of a horrified Sakura and they are real, get away from me, she shouted, pointing at her rather large and bushy eyebrows, and pulled her hand away from his. As if she had been touching lava, Peppero stuttered, heartbroken. He looked down and started shaking with his hair covering his face, worrying everyone, especially Sakura. When he looked up again, his eyes were shining with determination, and his fist was clenched and raised in the air. I promise that from this day forward, I will get Sakura's heart, and if I can, I will do 1,000 push-ups, and if I can't do that, I will do 2,000 push-ups with one hand. And yes, her crazy promises that would otherwise be considered impossible by normal human standards. They were interrupted by his Tenten, hitting him on the head again. We get it right, Karai, sometimes. I think you're worse than gay-sensei. Naruto yelled Yari suddenly after noticing his brother, who was standing near the staircase looking towards his team. Yari-chan, I'm glad to see you here. I was worried you'd chicken out and not show up. Naruto playfully scoffed, receiving a glare and a mock punch from his sister, as if I was going to lose the chance to kick your ass and become Chunin before you. And Tomi answered Akari with a slight smile on his face. A smile that Naruto returned. Are you Naruto? Namikaze asked, appearing in front of Naruto. Naruto nodded, hesitantly, uncomfortable with how close he was to his face. Means told me that you are a prodigy and a genius. I challenge you to a fight. Naruto looked at Lee as if he had just grown a second head. I don't think there's enough time for that. Maybe during the exams we'll have the chance to do it. Josh politely refused. Then I'll wait. Until then, Naruto Koin exclaimed happily in a good boy pose. Come on, we have to go to the second floor. The exam should start soon, said Shino, speaking for the first time. Everyone nodded and went up the stairs. XXX. Hello, Naruto. Akari and Nada Sakura here. Someone shouted to the group of Janins. The moment they reached the second floor, everyone looked curiously at the person who had called them and found as such. And Toma and Micah separated in front of a door greeting them. Next to them were Kusina, Kakashi, and Kurenai Sensei. Sakura was the she asked in response. Kakashi waved at her lazily. I see all, my cute Jinin. Made it after all, Kakashi said cheerfully, giving his team his famous eye smirk. That look was immediately cut short by a punch to the head courtesy of a furious Kusina. Don't say it like that, Ain't yelled at Kakashi, who was lying on the ground twitching every now and then in Kirin, and coughed loudly, drawing everyone's attention. We all came here to make sure everyone on their respective teams attended the exams voluntarily. If one person hadn't shown up, we would have sent their team home. But since you're all here, I'd like to wish you good luck on the exams and to do your best, she said, getting straight to the point as her classmates honing sensei were too busy doing nonsense. Karina and Sansei, said Akari in a low voice, breaking the silence that had settled and raising a delicate eyebrow. Sina and replied, yes, what about Yami-chan? She doesn't have a team. That means that she can't participate in the exam, she asked, giving her sister, who was now standing next to her, a worried look. Like, and Tommy doesn't have a team like you said. Okama has given her the option to join any team she chooses for the duration of the exams. Does that mean I can choose which team I want to join, she asked, and Tomi looked hopeful, to which Karina already felt with her head. She was about to immediately choose the team. Yes, after all, that was the team her sister and her best friend were on. But then he saw his brother and remembered that his brother was on Team 8 and his other best friend Anata was also on Team 8. He bit his lip. He was at a crossroads. On one hand, if he chose Team 7, he would hurt the feelings of his brother and his best friend for choosing Team 7 instead of them. And if he chose Team 8, the same thing would happen to Akari and Sakura. As if he read his mind, his brother nodded confidently and looked at Akari. She instantly understood what he was telling her. He was telling her to join Team 7. She gave him a grateful smile, and with a confident tone, he chose which team to join. I would like to join Team 7. Then so it's decided, and Tommy will be joining Team 7 during the exams. And with that, Karina and disappeared in a leaf shunin, although not before greeting her team and giving them a look that said, I believe in you, seeing that my work here is done. I'm leaving. Yane, said Kakashi, now healed from his wounds that he had received from Kuzuna. He also disappeared in a shunin after his exit. Kuzuna complained quietly as if he had actually done something. That Olga-san then turned to the Janins and gave them all a big beaming smile. Good luck, and make sure you kick everyone's ass. I'll be cheering for you all, he yelled loudly, raising his fist in the air, getting a yell of yes from Tomiyari in response to his little speech. Everyone else sweat dropped at his antics. Sigh, I can't believe I'm related to them. Take care of each other, okay? And Tomi-chan and Kari-chan. Nara-chan said, finally kissing his son's forehead, much to their embarrassment. After she left, Kiba started laughing. Naren said, laughing out loud. He blinked as he saw the world around him starting to go dark, and the only person he could see was Naruto, who was staring at him angrily. What was that? Naruto asked, and for a second Kiba swore. He saw the silhouette of a white figure wearing a white robe and a sword in his mouth appear behind Naruto. He gulped, his legs started to shake and ordering, "I didn't say anything." Naruto gave her one last look that almost made her heart stop. "I thought the world went back to normal. What are you waiting for, idiot? We're going to be late," yelled at Sakura. Kiba looked around and saw that everyone had already entered through the door while he was still standing in the same sport he had been in since he came to this floor. "You don't have to yell so loud, B. I can hear you perfectly," he yelled at Sakura while rubbing her sore ears. Sakura snorted and walked an XXX. Upon entering the room, the two teams were instantly subjected to a small amount of K from almost a person who was already in the way. Naruto simply scoffed at the pathetic attempt at intimidation. He had felt worse, much worse. "Naruto-kun," shouted a hungry voice, and before the red pack boy could act, he was caught by a girl with long platinum blonde hair. A girl he hoped he wouldn't meet during the exam. "Hi, you too." And None said, not bothering to remove the girl from the death grip she had on his arm. Was useless trying to get it off when she had put her hands anywhere on his body north of maybe the end of the world could make her let go. Even then, he doubted she would let go. "What's the problem? It seems all the newbies are here," said a lazy voice in front of him, a voice he recognized as belonging to Shikamaru, and on the lazy boy side was Choi eating a bag of snacks. "Shikamaru, you're such a lazy guy. I didn't think it would be you of all the people appearing," said Kiba. "Believe me, I wouldn't have appeared if someone hadn't blackmailed me into coming," he said, throwing a glare at Ino, who stuck her tongue out at him angrily. "Then all the rookies are here. This is incredible," said Kiba, excited. His dog barked loudly, agreeing with him. "You rookies are making a scene. Look, everyone is watching," said a new voice behind the group of Hennings. "And who are you?" Kiba asked rudely to the teenager, who seemed to have around 17 years old. He wore glasses, had onyx eyes, and ash-gray hair that was tied in a ponytail and extended to the top of his back with bangs framing both sides of his forehead. "My name is Jacuzzi Kabuto," said the teen, giving everyone a cocky smile, a smile that made some nervous, mainly Shikamaru and Naruto. "Is this your second time participating in the exams?" Kabuto Sen asked Sakura curiously. Kabuto gave her a smile and pushed up his glasses with a single figure. "No, this is my seventh try." "Seventh, man. You must really be useless," laughed Kiba, receiving a punch in the head from Ikari, and Sakura. Kabuto ignored his insult without flinching. "He is right, but do not be fooled. These exams are not as easy as they seem. Hey, since we are all ninjas of the leaf, how about if I help you rookies?" he suggested while taking out a deck of cards from his pockets. "These are chakra cards, and these cards I have information on each active ninja." That caught everyone's attention. "Someone?" Shikamaru asked curiously. Kabuto smiled confidently and pulled out a blank card. "As long as their names are on my cards, then I have all the information on them. What can you tell me about Namek and Naruto?" asked Shikamaru. Everyone looked at him in surprise. "Shikamaru," Ino yelled to her teammate, "do you have any information on Rogel and Yujito?" This time it was Naruto who asked, ignoring the shocked looks he was getting from everyone. He was curious about the Kimokuno Ichi he had met the day before. There was something about her that set off several alarm bells in his head. And as for him, he was curious as to how the bushy-eyebrowed boy had managed to move so fast. Almost Naruto is part of Team OO under Yui Kurenai, has completed 34 rank D and 1 rank C missions. His Tagetsu is average Jinjutsu high, and Wing Hutsu is off the charts. He put the card back in the deck of cards and pulled out another one with a picture of him on the cover. Rogel is a member of Team 9 under Madoge, has completed 87 rank Y missions. S rank missions were paused. This makes no sense here. It says he has no ITY for Jinjutsu or Ninjutsu, although his Tagetsu is amazing. Everyone was surprised. A person who couldn't do any Jinjutsu or Taoru, how was he even a ninja? And last but not least, neither Yujito is a member of Team Karibai under the leadership of Killer B. He has completed 9D rank missions, 12C rank missions, 3B rank missions. The Taijutsu is very high. The Ninjutsu is also very high, and Jinjutsu is non-existent. He finished with a bit of a sweat running down his face. Everyone else gulped after Kabuto finished reading the card. If someone like that was in the exams, how many more like her, or even stronger than her, were there? Everyone had a similar thought in their minds. Avoid the Kumo team at all costs. Naruto felt someone watching him. He looked around and saw Yujito, giving him a challenging smile. His teammates were also looking at him. He returned the smile with one of his own and turned around. "Shut up, brats," yelled a voice booming from the door where everyone was supposed to be. With the voice of a man wearing a large black trench coat, clearing his throat. "My name is Vicky Morono, supervisor of the first part of the Chunin exams. I want everyone to enter this room. You will be randomly selected to sit at tables that will be numbered according to the number you receive when you enter in bar. I'm sure you've read this part 1,000 times already, so I'm going to skip it. Pretty much everything happens the same as in canon, except that this time it is Tomi who gives the speech out loud about not giving up, with Akari backing up Ola, and Naruto goes to copy the answers of a person sitting in front of him, using his Sharingan to copy the strokes that the person makes with his pencil while writing XXX. Team 8 was in front of a huge steel door, observing the huge trees and plants that were inside. Everyone shuddered slightly when they heard a very loud and ferocious howl coming from inside the dark forest leave, and with that they opened the security doors instantly. They entered the forest. The exams were on the way. XXX. One day later with the team. Oh, I saw them coming this way. Were they? I don't see anyone. Shut up, idiot. They probably heard your voices and ran away. What is this? Other screams could be heard throughout the forest as gigantic, monstrous leeches fell from the trees on them, devouring them. Fire-style fireball jutsu, as if the jutsu involved a large ball made purely of fire, who headed towards the horde of leeches and burned them all. That was easier than he expected, Naruto commented, looking at the dead Genin team. His teammate standing next to him didn't comment. They too agreed with him. So far, they had encountered 4 teams, and none of those teams had proven to be a challenge for them. You see someone else near Hinata without muttering a single word or using any hand seals, and Nada's Yugon ignited with his bloodline active. He could see miles away, giving them an advantage over all the other teams. She jaded audibly, causing her teammates to look at her expectantly. I can see someone heading straight towards us. They are very fast, she said with a hint of panic in her voice. What else do you see this time? It was Shino who asked as her mind raced over what could be making her teammate react like that. Her chakra. I have never seen anything like it. It's so dark, and her breathing ragged. She froze completely, and in Nada Choo-Choo a silky laugh sounded all around the team, making Sino and Naruto tense in preparation, though Hinata visibly started to tremble. What do we have here? A Genius team. Lonely. How cute. The same voice spoke again. But this time they could see and hear where it came from. They could see the shadow of a person slowly approaching them from deep within the forest. When the person finally came into the light, everyone noticed it was a girl from the hidden grass village, the same girl who had given him back his crib and the creepy proctor of the second phase of the Chunning exams with her tongue. The same girl who everyone had had a bad feeling about. The person they all hoped they wouldn't meet looked them in the eyes, and at that very moment the world stopped moving. Naruto had felt his fair share of fear in his life. Living with his mother and grandmother, he had seen his fair share of things that would stop many hearts, but nothing could compare to what he had seen. He felt at that exact moment. He could hear his heart beating in his chest. His instincts, his body, his very soul were screaming at him to get away from the monster in front of him, to run with every ounce of his energy and never look back. He could see his death in many different ways, and none of them less terrifying than the other. He tried to speak, but it felt as if an indestructible weight had been placed upon him, digging into the spot where he stood. What is this? I can't move. Naruto looked at his companions for the corner of his eye and saw that both of them were in a similar state. I have to do something. What do you want? He asked, gathering all his courage and willpower to utter that one sentence. The grass. Kunoichi smiled and gave them a predatory smile. I have come for one thing, and one thing only. You. What could only be described as the largest snake the 3 Genin had ever seen rose up from behind the Kunoichi, as if controlled by her, slithered next to her, and attacked the still frozen team. The team, who could only watch helplessly as the snake approached them, too scared and frozen to do anything. Thinking quickly, Naruto pulled a kunai out of his pouch and without hesitation stabbed himself in the right thigh. The pain of the stab shook his entire body, nullifying the fear. He grabbed his 2 teammates and jumped just in time to stop the snake's massive jaws from swallowing them whole, using the pain to eliminate the fear. Impressive, but still not enough. The ninja mocked grass, with another snake appearing from above the team with its